The ritual begins at 7 a.m. Always. The alarm doesn't wake me. I'm already awake, have been for 10 minutes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city that never makes it through the triple-paned glass. My world is quiet. My world is clean. My world is under control. I swing my legs out of bed. Left foot first, then right. I walk to the bathroom. 17 steps. I brush my teeth. Up and down, 32 times. Side to side, 32 times. I shower. The water temperature is set to 104 degrees, not 103, not 105. Dressed. Black slacks. Gray shirt. Same as yesterday. Same as tomorrow. I enter the living space. My space. A single black leather couch. A glass coffee table. A single white ceramic mug on a single black slate coaster. One bookshelf, books arranged by color, then by height. It's my sanctuary. It's the only place my brain shuts up. Time for the morning wipe down. The air is still, but dust is chaos. It settles where it wants. Unacceptable. I grab the microfiber cloth from its designated hook. The spray bottle. 3 parts distilled water, 1 part white vinegar. The smell is sharp, clean. It smells like order. I start with the bookshelf. Top to bottom, left to right. Each spray is a short, controlled burst. Each wipe is a long, straight line. No swirls. Swirls are unpredictable. My movements are a machine. Precise. Reassuring. The glass of the coffee table is next. It gleams under the recessed lighting. Perfect. Then, the coaster. I lift the white mug. My favorite. A simple, heavy thing, with no logos, no imperfections. I spray the slate. I wipe it dry. I place the mug back. And I pause. My fingers are still on the ceramic. It's wrong. The base of the mug isn't centered on the coaster. It's off, maybe 2 millimeters to the left. I can see a tiny, crescent-shaped sliver of black slate that shouldn't be there. My brow furrows. I must have been careless. Distracted. My hand must have slipped. Getting old, Art, I mutter to myself, brain slipping. I lift it again. My eyes narrow, aligning the white circle of the mug's base perfectly with the black square of the coaster. I hold my breath as I lower it. Gently. There. Perfect concentricity. The balance is restored. I can feel the tension in my shoulders ease. It was nothing. Just a slip-up. My phone buzzes on the kitchen counter. It's a harsh, unwelcome sound. Work. My boss, probably. I glance at the coffee table one last time. The mug sits, a beacon of white on black. Correct. Safe. I turn and walk the 24 steps to the kitchen to answer it. It's exactly what I thought. Henderson. Yapping about quarterly reports I sent him 2 days ago. He says he never got the email. I know he did. He's just disorganized. A man who lives in chaos and expects me to bail him out. I sent it Tuesday, Mark. 9:15 a.m. The subject was Q3 projections, final. I keep my voice even. Calm. Well, it's not here, Art. I need it. The meeting is in an hour. I'll forward it again. I'm already tapping on my laptop. Sent. Forwarded. Done. See? Was that so hard? He says, his voice smug. I don't answer. I just listen to him drone on for another 4 minutes about synergy and leveraging assets and a dozen other words that mean nothing. My eyes drift from my laptop screen back towards the living room. Everything looks right. The lines of the couch are straight. The books are a perfect, silent rainbow. The sun is starting to cast a clean, rectangular block of light on the hardwood floor. Art, you there? Yes, Mark, I'm here. Good. Just make sure it doesn't happen again. He hangs up. I close the laptop with a sharp click. The man is an idiot. A messy, chaotic idiot. I take a deep breath, trying to push the irritation out of my system. My space is for quiet. For order. His noise doesn't belong here. I need to finish the ritual, restore the peace. I walk back into the living room, back to the coffee table, and my blood runs cold. The mug. It's moved again. This time, it's not just off by a couple of millimeters. It's halfway off the coaster, tilted at an angle, like someone set it down in a hurry. The perfect white circle is now a glaring, obvious mistake. A stain on the canvas of my room. My first thought is a flash of anger. Did Henderson's voice piss me off that much? Did I somehow jolt the table? No. The table is solid steel and glass. It doesn't jolt. My heart starts a low, heavy drum against my ribs. Wait. The word is a whisper. Something's not right. I stand perfectly still. I stop my breathing. I listen. Silence. Not the good silence. This is a different kind. A heavy, waiting kind of silence. My eyes dart around the room. The couch. The bookshelf. The window. Nothing is different. Nothing else has moved. Just the mug. My feet move on their own. I cross the room to the front door. The deadbolt. A heavy, satisfying chunk of steel. I grab it. It's thrown. Locked. I twist it back and forth. Solid. The chain is in its slide. Locked. I never leave it unlocked. Ever. I move to the window. It's a single, large pane of glass overlooking the street, 10 floors down. The lock is a small lever at the top. I reach up. It's set. Locked, just as I left it. Just as it always is. No one came in. No one could have come in. An earthquake? A tremor? I would have felt it. The water in the toilet bowl would be sloshing. I walk the 17 steps back to the bathroom. The water is still, a perfect, clear mirror. I pull out my phone. My fingers feel clumsy. I have a single, small security camera, disguised as a smoke detector, pointed at my front door. I never watch the feed. It's just for peace of mind. A final layer of control. I tap the app. The logo appears. It spins. And spins. Then, a small box of text. Connection to server lost. Please check your network. I tap retry. Spin, spin, spin. Connection to server lost. A drop of sweat trickles down my temple. I wipe it away, annoyed. The network is fine. My laptop was just online. My phone has full bars of Wi-Fi. I try to open a web browser. It loads instantly. It's not the network, it's the app, it's the camera. It's a feeling I haven't had in years. Not since before I built this life, this fortress of order. It's the feeling of a thread being pulled. The feeling of a crack appearing in the foundation. The feeling that I am not alone. The air in the room suddenly feels thick, hard to pull into my lungs. Every shadow seems darker. The clean, straight lines of my furniture seem to warp at the edges of my vision. That's it. I have to get out. Not run. Not flee. Just get out. Step into the hallway. Breathe different air. Reset my head. This is just stress. Henderson. Lack of sleep. My mind is playing tricks on me. That's what it is. A trick. My feet move faster now. I'm not walking. I'm striding. I get to the front door. My hand is shaking as I unlatch the chain. It makes a loud, metallic clatter in the quiet. I grip the deadbolt. It feels slick with my sweat. I turn it. The sound of the tumblers retracting is like a gunshot. I don't hesitate. I grab the knob, twist hard, and yank the door open. The hallway. It's empty. The beige walls, the nondescript gray carpet. The door to 10B across the way is closed. It's silent. Utterly, completely silent. No hum from the elevator down the hall. No air moving from the vents. A wave of dizziness hits me so hard, I have to put a hand on the doorframe to steady myself. The air out here, it's wrong. It doesn't smell like anything. Not old carpet. Not my neighbor's cooking. It's just dead. neutral. The light from the fixtures on the ceiling seems flat. It doesn't cast shadows. This isn't helping. This is worse. A spike of anger, hot and sharp, cuts through the fear. Anger at myself. At this episode. This is weakness. This is chaos. I pull back from the weird, dead hallway and slam the door shut. The sound echoes, huge and final. The deadbolt clicks home automatically. I lean my forehead against the cool wood of the door, my eyes squeezed shut. Get a grip, Art. Get a goddamn grip. I take one breath, then another. I am in my apartment. I am safe. I am in control. I turn around, and everything stops. My heart, my breath, my thoughts. The living room is perfect. The block of sunlight is on the floor. The books are a silent rainbow. The couch is immaculate. And on the coffee table, the mug sits in the exact center of the black slate coaster. A perfect, flawless placement. But it's not white. It's blue. A deep, royal blue. It wasn't blue. It was never blue. I have never owned a blue mug in my life. My eyes tear away from the impossible object on the table and snap to the digital clock on the bookshelf, the one I check 100 times a day. Its red numerals are sharp and clear. It reads, 7 a.m., 7 a.m. The red numbers burned. They didn't flicker, they didn't waver. They were a statement of fact in a world that had just ceased to make sense. My pulse was a frantic drum against the inside of my skull. It wasn't a blue mug. I don't own blue things. Blue is a chaotic color. It has too many shades. It's not definitive like black or white. It's the color of bruises. This is a hallucination. The thought came. A life raft in a sea of madness. Stress. Henderson. The lack of sleep. My mind, the one thing I honed and polished and perfected, had finally snapped a gear. It was projecting. It was inventing. Okay, Art. Okay, let's play along. Let's treat the hallucination like it's real. That's how you regain control. You accept the premise, then you dismantle it. My feet moved, stiff and robotic. 24 steps to the kitchen counter. I opened the cupboard, mugs. All white. Lined up into perfect rows of 4. Avoid where the one on the table should be. I reached for the coffee grounds. The scoop. The filter. The motions were automatic, a muscle memory that bypassed the screaming in my head. I made coffee. Then I walked back to the table. The blue mug was still there, an alien artifact on my sterile landscape. It was mocking me. I picked it up. The ceramic was cool, smooth, it felt real, it felt solid. This was the most terrifying part. A hallucination shouldn't have weight. I poured the hot, black coffee into the blue mug, a small act of defiance, an act of acceptance. See? It's just a mug, I'm using it, I'm in control. I am drinking coffee from a blue mug that does not exist. The logic was a serpent eating its own tail, but it was the only logic I had. I did not drink. I just stood there, watching the steam rise. My eyes scanned the room, looking for another lie, another crack in the world. And they found one. On my desk. It was a small object, lying face down. Silver. Ornate. A hand mirror with a tarnished, scrolling frame, the kind you'd find in a dusty antique shop. I knew it instantly. I'd bought it 3 days ago on a whim, a rare break from my routine. It was a piece of beautiful, contained chaos. I'd brought it home, felt a prickle of unease at its fussy design, and put it on the desk, face down. I didn't want it looking at me. I hadn't touched it since. It was a new variable, but one I had introduced myself. It was accounted for. My eyes snapped from the mirror back to the clock. 7:01 a.m. 1 minute had passed. A lifetime. I took a breath. And another. I walked to the desk. This was my sanctuary, within a sanctuary. A large slab of dark wood, wiped clean every morning and every night. My laptop, closed and centered. To its left, my keyboard and mouse, perfectly aligned. To its right, my pencils. 12 of them. Ticonderoga. Number 2. Sharpened every Monday to a needlepoint. They rested in a grooved wooden tray, parallel to the millimeter, like a line of well-drilled soldiers. They were my tools of order. My eyes moved down the line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. My coffee-drenched logic shattered. The 6th pencil was broken. Snapped cleanly in half. The 2 pieces lay in the groove, the splintered pale wood of the break, a raw wound in the perfect graphite line. It wasn't a hallucination. You don't hallucinate a sound you never heard. This was physical. This was an act of violence. This was vandalism in the cathedral of my mind. What the fuck? The words were a low growl. The fear was gone, replaced by a surge of white-hot rage. The mug was a trick of the mind. This was a message. Some son of a bitch. I spun around, my hands clenched into fists, my gaze flew to the door. Locked. The window. Locked. Who? How? The questions hammered at me, but a cold, clear imperative cut through the noise. Proof. I needed proof. I lunged for my laptop, flinging it open. The screen came to life. My fingers flew across the trackpad, clicking on the icon for the security camera app, the one that was down before. It had to work now. It had to. The logo spun. Connection to server lost. Please check your network. God damn it! I slammed my palm on the desk. The remaining 11 pencils rattled in their tray. The 2 broken pieces of the 6th didn't move. Think. There's another way. Photos. I take pictures. Every Sunday, after the deep clean, I take a series of photos of the apartment from set angles. It's part of the system. A visual record of perfection. A baseline. They're on the hard drive. I could open last week's photo of the desk and prove to myself that the pencil was whole. I could prove I'm not insane. I closed the camera app. Open the Pictures folder. The subfolder was labeled Archive A10. Inside, folders for each month. I clicked on the current month. Then the folder for last Sunday. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was it. The moment of truth. I double-clicked the first image file. desk_angle_1.jpg. The spinning wheel. Then a small box of text. The file could not be opened. It may be damaged or use a file format that Preview doesn't recognize. I clicked OK. I tried the next one. Bookshelf_wide.jpg. Same message. I clicked faster. A frantic, desperate rhythm. Window_left.jpg. Living_area_center.jpg. Coffee_table_detail.jpg. Could not be opened. Could not be opened. Could not be opened. Every single one. Not just from last week. The entire month. The month before that. A year's worth of meticulous, ordered, perfect records. Gone. Corrupted. Wiped. It wasn't just in the room with me. It was in my computer. It was erasing itself. It was erasing my sanity, one file at a time. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a hallucination. This was a siege. And that's when the rage collapsed, leaving a vacuum that pure animal panic rushed in to fill. The walls of the room seemed to bend inwards. The clean lines of the furniture vibrated at the edge of my sight. The air was thick, heavy, impossible to draw into my burning lungs. I had to get out. Right now. No more thinking, no more planning, just run. My legs were already moving, a clumsy, stumbling dash for the front door. The 24 steps felt like a mile. My hand, slick with sweat, fumbled with the deadbolt. The click of the tumblers retracting was like a starting pistol. I grabbed the knob, twisted, and tore the door open, ready to spill out into the hallway, into the world, into anything that wasn't this room. The hallway. It was there, just as it was before. The same bland beige walls, the same ugly gray carpet, the same dead, flat light with no shadows. The door to 10B was closed. An absolute, profound silence hung in the air, a silence so complete it felt like a pressure against my eardrums. I stood on the threshold, 1 foot in my apartment, 1 foot in this strange, sterile void. Run? Where? Down the silent hall to the silent elevator? Pound on 10B's door? What if they opened it and their face was wrong? What if they didn't have a face at all? The known horror behind me versus the unknown horror in front of me. My training, my instincts, my entire life of control screamed one thing: retreat to the fortress. In a single, convulsive movement, I threw myself back inside and slammed the heavy door shut. The boom was huge, final. The deadbolt clicked home. I leaned against the wood, my whole body shaking. My breath came in ragged, painful sobs. Okay. Plan C. The phone. The one thing that still worked. I wasn't going out there. I was bringing the outside world in. I would call the police. I would tell them someone was in my apartment. I would tell them my pencil was broken and my photos were gone. They would think I was crazy. I didn't care. Let them come, let them break the door down and drag me out. Anything. With a final, shuddering breath, I found a sliver of resolve. I pushed myself off the door. I turned around to face the room, to walk to the kitchen counter and get my phone. And the world reset. My eyes swept the room in a single, horrified glance. The desk. The row of pencils. 12 perfect, unbroken soldiers in their grooved wooden tray. The 6th one was whole. The raw, splintered wood was gone. The graphite point was sharp. It was exactly as it should be. The laptop was shut. The blue mug on the coffee table was gone. In its place, my white ceramic mug sat on its black slate coaster, perfectly centered. My brain refused to process it. It was too much. A full system error. I stood there, swaying on my feet, the only sound the frantic, wet gasps of my own breathing. My gaze drifted, numbly, towards my desk again. The pencils. The laptop. My eyes fell on the object lying beside them. The antique hand mirror, still face down. Still there. A single point of continuity in the cascading madness. It was the only thing besides me that seemed to remember the last cycle. But it had changed. A fine, black line bisected the tarnished silver of its back. A crack. A tiny hairline fracture that ran from the edge of the frame to the center. It wasn't there before. I knew it wasn't. I would have felt it. I would have seen it. My feet moved without my permission. One slow step, then another. I reached the desk. My hand trembled as I reached out, my fingers hovering over the cool metal. I had to see. I had to know. I turned the mirror over. The glass was dark, reflecting the distorted lines of my ceiling. And on its surface, mirroring the imperfection on its back, was another crack. A thin, sharp, undeniable line cutting across the reflective glass like a scar. A new scar on a world that was supposed to be perfect. The crack was real. A hairline fracture running across the dark glass. A tiny, sharp scar on a world that was supposed to be perfect. It matched the crack on the silver back. An internal wound mirroring an external one. My breath hitched. The previous sequence, the blue mug, the broken pencil, the corrupted files, was a rapid descent into chaos. This, however, was different. This was a change that had persisted through a reset, a constant. Okay, the word was a life raft in my skull. Okay. If the world resets when I open and close the door, then this is a game. It has rules. Twisted, insane rules, but rules nonetheless. And if there are rules, I can learn them. I can win. Control isn't about keeping things the same anymore. Control is about understanding the changes. My mind, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, clicked into a familiar gear: analysis. The rage and panic receded, leaving behind a cold, sharp resolve. I would not be a victim in my own home. I would be an observer, a scientist in a laboratory of madness. I walked to my desk drawer and pulled out a fresh moleskin notebook and a pen. The smooth black cover felt reassuringly solid in my hand. I walked back to the coffee table, sat down, and opened it to the first page. My hand was surprisingly steady as I wrote. Loop number 3, presumed, 7 a.m. Clock digital red. Coffee mug, white, centered on coaster. Desk, laptop closed. Pencils 12, whole, aligned. Anomaly, antique hand mirror. Now has 2 matching cracks, front and back. I underlined the word anomaly. I looked at the mirror on the desk, its tarnished silver glinting in the morning light. It was the only new object introduced into this environment in weeks. An object I brought in myself. A beautiful piece of contained chaos, I'd thought. Maybe that was it. Maybe the chaos wasn't contained. I stood up and walked to the desk, my movements deliberate. I picked up the mirror. It felt cool, heavy, a solid, real thing. It was the source. It had to be. It was the only explanation that made any kind of sense. If I could understand it, I could control it. Or destroy it. I held it up, angling the dark glass to see my own reflection. Maybe it would be distorted. Maybe it would show someone else. Maybe it wouldn't show anything at all. My face stared back at me, pale, strained, with dark circles under the eyes. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just me. I turned my head to the left. The reflection followed. I turned it to the right. It followed again. A perfect one-to-one copy of reality. I lowered the mirror, a prickle of disappointment mixing with relief. So it was just an object. The crack was just a thing that had happened. My eyes narrowed. Wait. There was something, a flicker, a tremor at the edge of sight that my brain registered a split second after the fact. It was almost nothing, the kind of visual static you get when you're exhausted. My eyes are playing tricks, that's all. I lifted the mirror again, holding it steady, staring directly into my own eyes. I focused. I took a slow, deep breath, held it, and then deliberately, I blinked. My eyes in the reflection blinked back. But not with me. A fraction of a second later, the difference was infinitesimal. A synaptic misfire. A beat of a hummingbird's wing. But it was there. My eyelids closed, and for a sliver of a moment the man in the glass kept staring, his eyes wide open, before his own lids slid shut. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a reflection. A reflection is instantaneous. It's physics. Light. A reflection doesn't wait, it doesn't watch. My heart started a frantic, stuttering beat against my ribs. I tried again. I opened my mouth slowly. The mouth in the mirror opened a heartbeat after mine. I raised my left hand. The reflection's hand came up late. It felt like watching a satellite feed with a half-second delay. It was my face. It was my room behind me. But the man wearing my face was on a time delay. He was processing my movements and then mimicking them. Learning them. The notebook and the pen clattered to the floor. My scientific detachment shattered into a million pieces. The thing in my hands wasn't just a cursed object. It was an observer, an intelligence. And I was showing it how to be me. With a choked gasp, I flung the mirror away from me. It didn't shatter. It landed with a dull thud on the cushions of the sofa, face down. I scrambled for the throw blanket at the end of the couch and threw it over the mirror, covering it completely. A childish, primitive act. If I can't see it, it can't see me. I stood there, panting, my back pressed against the wall. Safer. It felt safer. The source was contained, muffled by fabric. Blind. The silence in the room was absolute once more. My own ragged breathing was an intrusion. I listened. Listened for anything. A creak. A shift. Nothing. Maybe I had won. Maybe it was that simple. Cover it up. End the connection. Then I heard it. A scrape. Faint. So faint I thought I'd imagined it. C-H-K. 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 It was coming from the sofa. From under the blanket. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. It was a dry, insistent sound, the sound of a sharp point being dragged across glass. It was slow, deliberate, and it was not stopping. CHK, 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 scrape. My training, my order, my whole world screamed at me to stay away, to run for the door, to reset. But I couldn't. I had to know. The not knowing was a worse torture than whatever lay under that piece of wool. My feet moved, stiff and shaking. 1 step. 2. I reached the edge of the sofa. The scratching sound was clearer now, rhythmic. It was coming directly from the lump in the blanket where the mirror lay. Trembling, my hand shot out and gripped the edge of the blanket. I took one last shuddering breath and yanked it away. The mirror lay face up on the cushions, and on its surface there was a word. Hello. It wasn't written in dust or condensation. It was scratched into the surface of the glass itself. The letters were crude, sharp, like a child's angry scrawl, and as my eyes focused, a new wave of nausea hit me so hard my knees buckled. The feel of the glass under my thumb just moments ago had been perfectly smooth. The scratches weren't on the surface. They were etched from the inside. The fear was gone. In its place, a geyser of pure, unadulterated rage erupted from my gut. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't a glitch. This was a taunt. An invasion. Vandalism on my life, on my sanity. It was locked in here with me, and it was fucking with me. You want to play? The voice that came out of my throat was a low, animal growl I didn't recognize. Fucking play then! My eyes darted around the room, looking for a weapon. The heavy wooden dining chair. Perfect. In 2 strides I was there, grabbing it by the backrest, its weight solid and real in my hands. I hefted it over my head, my knuckles white, my arms screaming with adrenaline. All my terror, all my confusion, all my violated sense of order focused into a single point. I brought the chair down on the mirror with everything I had. A sickening crack exploded through the apartment. It wasn't the sound of shattering glass. It was the sound of splintering wood. The chair legs flew off, one embedding itself in the drywall. The backrest disintegrated in my hands, a shower of splinters and shards raining down onto the carpet. I was left holding a jagged, useless piece of wood. I stood there, panting, chest heaving, staring at the sofa. The mirror was untouched. Not a scratch. Not a chip. The word hello gleamed up at me, mocking my tantrum, mocking my weakness. The chair, my solid, real, heavy chair, was destroyed. The mirror, the impossible thing, was pristine. It was over. I had lost this round. The rage collapsed, leaving only a hollow, frantic panic. The door. The reset. It was the only move I had left. I dropped the broken piece of the chair and lunged for the front door. My sweaty hands slipped on the knob. I fumbled, sobbed in frustration, and finally got it open. I tore the door wide, letting the dead, silent air of the hallway wash over me, and then slammed it shut with a boom that shook the walls. Click! The deadbolt slid home. I leaned against the door, my body a wreck of tremors. My eyes were squeezed shut. I was giving it what it wanted, another reset, another chance for it to change the rules. I didn't care. After a long minute, my breathing slowed. My pulse began to find a less frantic rhythm. I had to see. I had to know what price I had paid for this reset. With a final, shuddering breath, I pushed myself off the door and turned around. The room was perfect. My eyes swept over the scene in a single, horrified glance. The dining chair sat in its corner, whole, its 4 legs planted firmly on the floor. The splinters were gone. The hole in the drywall was gone. The cushions on the sofa were plump and undisturbed. My gaze snapped to the desk. The mirror was there. The horrible cracks, front and back, were gone. The crude, scratched word had vanished. The glass was a flawless, dark pool. But it wasn't face down anymore. It wasn't lying flat at all. It was propped up on its handle, standing upright on the desk. Its face was angled perfectly towards the center of the room, towards the front door, towards me. Waiting, watching. No, I refused. My back was to it. I could feel its gaze on my spine, a cold pressure point between my shoulder blades. The mirror, standing upright on the desk, waiting. Fuck it. The thought was a shield. A new rule in this fucked up game. You don't exist if I don't look. You have no power if I don't give it to you. This loop, I would do nothing. I would be a stone. I walked to the center of the room, away from the desk, away from the walls, away from everything. I lowered myself to the floor, crossed my legs, and closed my eyes. A parody of meditation. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate drumbeat in the quiet. Quiet. The room was always so quiet until it wasn't. I focused on my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The mantra started in my head, a low, desperate hum. It's not there. You don't see it. It can't hurt you. It's not there. You don't see it. It can't hurt you. My mind, a traitor, kept a perfect mental map of the room. The desk behind me. The flawless waiting glass. The couch to my left. The dining chair in the corner, solid and whole again. The front door in front of me, my only broken escape hatch. And the wall to my right. Empty, except for the one photograph. My eyes snapped open. I didn't mean to. It was a reflex. A tick. The need to check. To confirm. The photo hung there, perfectly level. A single 5x7 frame, the only crack in my minimalist fortress. The only piece of the past I allowed myself to keep. It was from our trip to the coast. Me and Chloe. The sun was behind us, making our hair glow. We were both grinning. Wide, stupid grins. I'm holding the camera out, my arms straining. She's leaning into me, her head on my shoulder, eyes crinkling at the corners. I remembered the taste of salt on my lips. I remembered the sound of her laugh, carried away by the wind. I stared at the photo. My smile was still there. A ghost from a better life. Hers was gone. It wasn't a subtle change. It wasn't a trick of the light. Her mouth was a flat, thin line. The crinkles at the corners of her eyes were gone. They were just eyes. Cold, looking straight ahead. Her head was no longer tilted into my shoulder. It was upright. A careful inch of distance between us. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was disappointed. It was the exact expression she'd had on her face the day she packed her bags. The look that said, I knew it would come to this. I knew you couldn't change. A wave of nausea churned in my stomach. The air turned thin. My strategy of non-engagement was a joke. It didn't need me to look at the mirror. It was in the walls. It was in my goddamn memories. The old pain, an acid I thought I had neutralized with routine and order, flooded my system. The arguments. The nights I spent reorganizing the spice rack while she cried in the bedroom. My obsession with symmetry, with control. The obsession that had scrubbed her, and all her wonderful, beautiful chaos right out of my life. I had to hear her voice. The thought was an electric shock. I didn't know why. To warn her? To apologize? Or just to hear it? To prove she was still real, that a version of her existed out there who could still smile. I scrambled to my feet, my legs clumsy. My phone was on the kitchen counter, where it always was. I snatched it up, my thumb swiping frantically across the screen. My fingers were slick with sweat. I found her name, Chloe. I didn't even have to think. I pressed the call button and jammed the phone to my ear. 1 ring. 2 rings. Then, a click. Not voicemail, a sound from a bygone era. We're sorry. The number you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and try again. Click. Beep, 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 beep. The disconnected tone drilled into my ear. Impossible. She wouldn't have changed her number. She'd had it for 10 years. I lowered the phone, staring at the blank screen. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my sanity. It was isolating me, cutting me off, proving that everything good was gone. My eyes fell on the laptop. It sat on the desk, closed, a sleek black rectangle of potential connection to the outside world. To a world where Chloe's number still worked. A world where her picture still smiled. I shoved the dining chair aside and sat down, flipping the laptop open. The screen flared to life. It wasn't on my clean, organized desktop. It wasn't on the login screen. It was a Word document. It filled the entire screen. The background was white, the text black. The cursor at the bottom of the page blinked. A slow, steady pulse, like a patient heartbeat. At the very top, in bold, was the file name, draft_never_essend.docx. No, oh God, no. My blood ran cold. I knew this file. I had written it the night she left, fueled by whiskey and a self-righteous fury. I'd poured every ounce of my bitterness, my resentment, my cruelty into it. I had reread it the next morning, sober and horrified, and deleted it. Permanently. Dragged it to the trash, emptied the trash, ran a disk utility to wipe the free space. It was gone. It was supposed to be gone forever. But here it was. An indictment. My eyes, against my will, scanned the lines. You think you're a martyr, don't you? Walking away from the broken man. But you didn't try to fix anything. You just watched. You loved the idea of a project, but you hated the work. All your little messes. Your clothes on the floor, your mugs left on the table, you called it living. I called it disrespect. You were a slob, Chloe. A beautiful, charming slob, and you thought your smile could excuse anything. I'm glad you're gone. The silence is a relief. The order is a relief. For the first time in years, I can breathe in my own home. Every word was a hammer blow. Lies. All of them. Lies I had told myself to survive the pain. And the room had found them. The room had dug up the worst version of me and was holding it in front of my face. The cursor at the bottom of the page blinked. Blink! Blink! It wasn't just showing me the file. It was waiting for me to continue. To add more venom. I felt naked. Skinned alive. Every secret shame, every hidden ugliness, excavated and put on display. The mirror hadn't needed to show me a monster. It just had to show me myself. A sound tore from my throat. It wasn't a word. It was a raw, animal noise of violation. My hands shot out, gripping the sides of the laptop. My carefully constructed world of order, my sanctuary, had become a torture chamber designed just for me. The chaos wasn't just in the room anymore. It was inside me, clawing its way out. Fuck you! I screamed the words at the screen, at the silent, blinking cursor. With a surge of adrenaline, I ripped the laptop from the desk and, in one violent motion, hurled it at the wall. The impact was a sickening crunch of plastic and metal. The screen shattered, a spiderweb of black lines radiating from the point of impact. The whole thing fell to the floor in a dead, broken heap. It slid a few inches, leaving a black smear on the white baseboard. There. Chaos. I had made it. My own two hands. I stood there, panting, my chest heaving. This silence that followed was different. It wasn't waiting. It was broken. Wounded. The room felt wrong. The perfect lines were gone. The order was violated. I couldn't breathe. My OCD, the very thing that had driven Chloe away, was now a klaxon screaming in my skull. Wrong. 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 Fix it. Clean it. Make it right. But I couldn't. The only way to fix it was the door. The reset. The final, desperate move of a trapped animal. I spun around and lunged for the front door. My hand closed over the cold metal of the knob. I didn't hesitate. I tore it open, sucked in a single desperate breath of the dead, sterile air from the hallway, and slammed it shut. The boom echoed in the small space. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy, final click. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, eyes squeezed shut, my body shaking. My mind was a blank void of terror. I had done it again. I had played its game, I had reacted. And now I would pay the price. Slowly, after a minute that stretched into an eternity, I forced my tremors to subside. I had to look. I had to catalog the new nightmare. It's the only control I have left. I pushed myself off the door and turned around. The room was perfect again. My breath caught in my throat. The broken laptop was gone from the floor. The smear on the baseboard had vanished. On the desk the laptop sat, closed and pristine, as if nothing had ever happened. My eyes darted to the wall on my right, to the photograph. It was still hanging there, perfectly level, but it had been torn, a jagged, violent rip right down the middle, separating me from her. Her half was gone. The frame now held only my side of the picture, my stupid, smiling face, my outstretched arm, grinning at nothing, utterly, completely alone. No more. I wasn't going to play, not by its rules. The ripped photograph was a declaration of war, and my new strategy was unconditional surrender. A tactical retreat into the self. If it controlled the room, I would abandon the room. If it fed on my senses, I would starve it. My first move was to the window. I grabbed the thick cord and yanked. The blackout blinds cascaded down with a satisfying series of clacks, plunging the room into a deep, artificial twilight. The stark lines of my furniture softened into gray suggestion. Good. Sight was a liability. Next, the armoire. On the top shelf in its original box were the noise-canceling headphones, a high-end model I'd bought for flights, an indulgence in my otherwise Spartan life. I pulled them out, the cool, smooth plastic a comfort in my trembling hands. This was my armor. I walked to the bed, my movements deliberate, almost robotic. I took the silk eye mask from the bedside table, another travel accessory, and stretched the elastic. It was soft against my skin. I lay down on the bed fully clothed. I didn't get under the covers. That felt too much like hiding, too much like a child's game. This was a tactical maneuver. I slipped the eye mask over my eyes, and the gray world vanished, replaced by a perfect, featureless black. Then, the headphones. I slid them over my ears. The passive canceling immediately muffled the low ambient hum of the apartment building, the sound of my own ragged breathing. I fumbled for the power button on the side of the ear cup, pressed it. A faint hiss filled my ears. White noise. A static waterfall designed to wash away the world. I closed my eyes behind the mask, focusing on the sound. A wall of pure, meaningless noise. It was my fortress. No pictures could change in here. No letters could appear on a screen. No phantom smells could drift from the walls. In this black, silent capsule of my own making, I was untouchable. Let it rearrange the furniture. Let it hang a goddamn chandelier from the ceiling. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't see. I wouldn't hear. I was a rock in the middle of a river, and the water could rush and rage, but it could not move me. My heartbeat, a frantic bird in a cage, began to slow. The tension in my shoulders eased a fraction. I focused on the hiss. In. Out. The sound was a mantra. Nothing can get in. Nothing. And for a long time, nothing did. I floated in the warm, roaring darkness. I might have drifted off. I might have just been suspended in that space between thought and sleep. It was a victory. A small, pathetic victory, but mine. Then, a flicker. So small I thought I'd imagined it. A single, high, clear note, like a tiny silver bell rung miles away. It was there for a second, then swallowed by the static. My brain, I told myself, a trick of the mind, auditory pareidolia, finding patterns in the chaos. I held my breath, listening, but there was only the hiss. I let the breath out slowly, a shaky sigh. I was just spooked. My mind was eating itself. Then it came again. 3 notes this time. A clear, delicate phrase. It cut through the white noise, not by being louder, but by being sharper, more defined, like a needlepoint of sound against a blanket of wool. My blood went cold. I knew the tune. Oh God, I knew it. It was a simple, looping melody from a cheap music box Chloe had owned, a silly little thing she'd kept on her dresser. She used to hum it when she was painting, a soft, absent-minded sound that had once been the soundtrack to my life. The sound of peace. The sound of her. My hands flew to my head, ripping the headphones off. The hiss vanished, replaced by the ringing shock of sudden silence. My own breathing was a hurricane in my ears. I lay there, rigid, straining to hear. The room was silent. Absolutely silent. Thank God. It was in my head. A memory. A ghost triggered by the stress, by the picture. The melody started again. Not in my head. It was in the room, clear as day. A tiny, tinny plinking. It wasn't loud, but it filled the space completely. I sat bolt upright on the bed, tearing the eye mask from my face. My eyes, accustomed to the black, struggled with the gloom. The room was exactly as I had left it. The blinds were down, the furniture was in place. Nothing had changed, but the music was everywhere. I scrambled off the bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I spun around, my head whipping from side to side, trying to find the source. Where was it coming from? The desk? The kitchen counter? The closet? It was impossible to place. It had no direction. It wasn't coming from a single point. It was coming from the walls. I stumbled forward, pressing my ear against the cool plaster of the wall beside the bed. The music was there, a faint vibration against my cheekbone, humming directly into my skull. It was inside the wall. I lurched to the other side of the room, pressing my ear against the wall that held the front door. It was there too, louder maybe. I dropped to my hands and knees, my palms flat on the wood floor. The vibrations ran up my arms. It was in the floor. I looked up at the ceiling, at the smooth, white expanse. It was coming from there, too. The entire room. The entire goddamn room was singing her song. It was a cage of sound. A prison of memory. My fortress had been turned inside out. Its walls transformed into the bars of my cell. "Stop it," I whispered, the words getting lost in the gentle, relentless tune. "Please, just stop." I clamped my hands over my ears, pressing until my skull ached. It did nothing. The sound wasn't entering through my eardrums anymore. It was resonating in my bones, in my teeth. I could feel it buzzing behind my eyes. It was a part of me. The thing, the room, it wasn't just showing me my pain. It was injecting it into me. The melody began to loop for the 10th, the 20th time. The same 8 simple notes. Over. And over. And over. That sweet, innocent tune, the one that meant Chloe and sunlight and lazy Sunday mornings, was becoming a scalpel, methodically carving away at my sanity. And then it changed. The change started on the 5th note of the loop. It went flat. A sour, discordant clink that made my jaw tighten. The next loop, 2 notes were wrong. They were still recognizable, but twisted. Sickly, like a beautiful face melting. Loop after loop, the decay accelerated. The tempo dragged. The notes warped, stretching and bending into groan-like tones. The gentle plinking of a music box was gone. It was being replaced by something else. A low, electronic hum crept in beneath the dying melody. A buzz. The sound of a faulty speaker, of a bad connection. The warped notes dissolved completely, consumed by the hum, which grew louder, higher in pitch. It became a whine, a piercing, digital tone that scraped at the inside of my ears. Then, the whine became a shriek. It was the sound of a microphone feeding back into a speaker, magnified 1,000 times. A raw, electronic scream of pure, agonizing frequency. It wasn't just a noise. It was a physical force. It slammed into me, shaking the room, vibrating the air in my lungs. My vision blurred. Needles of pain shot from my temples to the base of my neck. My hands, still clamped over my ears, were useless. The sound was inside my head, a dental drill boring directly into my brain. A scream tore from my own throat, but I couldn't even hear it over the electronic banshee howl. I was blind with pain, deaf with noise. My mind short-circuited. There was no thought, no strategy, no surrender. There was only the sound and the animal instinct to make it stop, to run. I staggered away from the wall, my legs like rubber. I couldn't see anything but the pulsing static behind my eyes, but I knew where the door was. I launched myself across the room, a desperate, clumsy sprint, my shoulder crashing into the edge of the desk. I didn't feel it. I just kept moving. My hand found the doorknob. The cold metal was a shock of reality in the screaming chaos. I twisted it, tore the door open, and fell out into the hallway. The shriek cut off, instantly. The sudden silence was a physical blow. It was so complete, so absolute, it left me dizzy. I lay sprawled on the cheap hallway carpet, gasping for air, my ears ringing with a phantom echo. My body trembled uncontrollably. I pushed myself up onto my hands and knees, my forehead pressed against the cool, rough carpet. I stayed there for a full minute, just breathing. In, out, The air was dead and stale, but it was quiet. It was blessedly, beautifully quiet. Slowly the shaking subsided. The switch had been flipped. The game had been played. I pulled myself to my feet, my muscles screaming in protest. I turned and looked at the open door to my apartment. I reached out a trembling hand and pushed it shut. The boom of the door settling in its frame echoed down the empty hall, the heavy, final click of the deadbolt sliding home. The reset. I stood there, leaning against the hallway wall, my eyes closed. I waited. I gave it a moment to do its work, to tidy up, to prepare the next exhibit in its museum of my suffering. When I couldn't stand the waiting anymore, I reached for the knob, turned it, and pushed the door open. I stepped inside. The room was perfect. Pristine. The blinds were up, letting in the flat, gray light of the afternoon. The headphones were in their box in the armoire. The eye mask was on the bedside table. My eyes swept the room, cataloging. Desk, clear. Laptop, closed. Couch, empty. Photo on the wall, ripped. Everything was as the last loop had ended. Almost everything. My gaze settled on the bedside table. My minimalist shrine. It was supposed to be empty, except for the eye mask, a clean, white surface. It wasn't empty. Sitting in the exact center of the table was a small box. My heart stopped. It was made of a dark, polished wood, maybe walnut. Intricate floral patterns were carved into the lid and sides, delicate and impossibly detailed. On the front was a small, tarnished brass latch. It was a music box. I couldn't breathe. The air in my lungs turned to stone. It sat there, a dead weight in the center of my chest. It was Chloe's, the music box she'd found at some forgotten flea market, the one she loved because it was, in her words, perfectly damaged. My gaze was locked on it, the dark walnut wood, the carved flowers coiling around the sides, the little brass latch, dull with age. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out, to hit the reset switch again. But my feet were nailed to the floor. It knew. The room, the thing, it hadn't just used a memory. It had pulled a physical object from that memory. It had materialized my pain and set it on the table like a trophy. No, I wouldn't touch it. I wouldn't open it. I wouldn't give it the satisfaction of hearing that song again. Giving in to its game was how it won. Ignoring it was a form of defiance. But I couldn't just stand here, staring. The silence was a waiting game. I needed to move, to do something, anything. Control. That was it. That was the only weapon I had left. Control what you can control. My eyes darted around the room, looking for a task, a mission, something solid and real in this nightmare of shifting reality. My eyes landed on the small metal toolbox I kept in the armoire. An idea sparked, a desperate grasping at straws idea. Numbers, logic, things that couldn't be faked, things that were absolute. I would measure, I would map out my prison. I would create a schematic of my own sanity. My movements were stiff, robotic. I walked to the armoire, my eyes deliberately averted from the bedside table. I opened the doors. The toolbox was there, right where it should be. I pulled it out, the cold metal a comfort. I carried it to the center of the room and knelt on the floor. I clicked open the latches. Inside, nestled among screwdrivers and a hammer, was the tape measure, a yellow 25-foot Stanley. I pulled out the metal tab. It made a sharp, clean Z-zip as I extended it. A real sound. A good sound. I went to the long wall first, the one with the ripped photograph. I pressed the end of the tape into the corner, walked to the other side, and locked it. I knelt, my eyes inches from the black numerals on the yellow tape. 14 feet, 8 inches. I took the small notepad and pen from my back pocket. I wrote it down. Long wall, 14 feet, 8 inches. I did the other wall, the one with the door. 11 feet, 4 inches. I wrote it down. Short wall, 11 feet, 4 inches. A strange calm started to settle over me. This was methodical. This was real. I measured the height of the desk, the width of the couch, the distance from the window to the armoire. Each number was a brick in a new fortress, a fortress of fact. My hands moved with purpose. I was no longer a victim cowering in the dark. I was a surveyor, a cartographer of my own hell. I filled the page with numbers and lines. a blueprint. My heart rate, a frantic drum against my ribs, began to slow. I wasn't going to sleep. Sleep was surrender. I would stay awake. I would watch. And I would measure. With every number I wrote down, I felt a sliver of power return. The music box on the table was just a thing. An object. It couldn't hurt me if I didn't let it. I sat back on my heels, looking at the full page of data. My data. I felt a surge of something that felt dangerously like hope. I had a baseline. A control group. Let it change something now? I would know. I would have proof. Proof. My breath caught in my throat. I had older proof. A few weeks ago, before this began, I'd had a brief, obsessive phase about rearranging the furniture. I'd measured the whole room then, too, to see if the couch would fit against the other wall. I never did it, but I'd written down the dimensions. In this same notebook. My hands trembled as I flipped back through the pages. My own handwriting greeted me. Shopping lists. A phone number without a name. Doodles. Then I found it. A page from about a month ago. Titled, simply, Room Dim. My eyes scanned the old numbers, then darted to the new ones on the fresh page. Long wall, 14 feet 8 inches. That's what I just measured. The old note read, long wall, 14 feet 10 inches. My blood ran cold. No, I measured wrong. That's all. I must have let the tape sag. Or didn't push it flush against the wall. It had to be a mistake. I scrambled back to the wall, the tape measure feeling slick in my sweaty palm. I did it again, more carefully this time. I stretched the tape so tight it hummed. I jammed the end into the corner so hard my knuckles scraped the plaster. I held my breath. 14 feet 8 inches. Exactly. A tremor started in my hands. I looked back at the notebook, the new page, the old page. Short wall, 11 feet 4 inches. My new measurement. The old note, short wall, 11 feet 6 inches. 2 inches. 2 inches gone from the length. 2 inches gone from the width. It wasn't a mistake. The numbers didn't lie. The room was shrinking. The walls were closing in. An animal panic seized me. The calm I built shattered into a million pieces. The air thickened, pressing in on me. I needed to see. I needed to see the outside. I needed a landmark, something to prove the world was still there, that I wasn't just in a box. I lurched to my feet and ran to the window. I grabbed the bottom of the blinds and ripped them upwards. They shot up with a rattling crash. I pressed my face to the cool glass, desperate for the sight of the city street below, the windows of the building across the way, the gray, familiar sky. There was nothing. There was only brick. A wall of dark, moss-stained brick was right outside my window, not across a courtyard, not a few feet away. It was inches from the glass. So close I could see the gritty texture of the mortar, the hairline crack spiderwebbing across the surface. It was a solid, final, inescapable wall. I stumbled back, a gasp tearing from my throat. It felt like choking. My apartment wasn't on the third floor anymore. It wasn't anywhere. It had been plucked out of the world and sealed in a tomb. The feeling of the walls pressing in wasn't a paranoid fantasy anymore. It was real. I was being buried alive. My lungs burned. I couldn't get enough air. The walls, the solid, real walls, seemed to pulse, to inch closer with every frantic beat of my heart. Claustrophobia, a monster I hadn't seen since I was a child, trapped in a closet, roared to life inside me. It clawed at my throat, squeezed my chest. I was going to suffocate. I was going to die in here. No, not like this. My wild eyes scanned the room, looking for a weapon, an escape. The door was a trap, a reset button for a worse game. The window, it had to be the window. Break the glass, break the brick, claw my way out. My gaze fell on the heavy metal lamp on my desk, a solid base of brushed steel, heavy, hard. A guttural roar ripped from my chest. It wasn't a word. It was the sound of a cornered animal. I lunged for the desk, grabbing the lamp by its neck, ripping the cord from the wall socket with a shower of sparks. I spun toward the window, the lamp held high like an axe. No! I screamed, swinging with all my might. I braced for the explosion of shattering glass. Clank! The sound was dead, flat. A dull, metallic impact that vibrated up my arms and into my teeth. The lamp bounced off the window. The glass didn't even crack. It was like hitting solid steel. Panic turned to rage. I screamed again, a raw, wordless shriek, and swung again. Clank! And again. Clank, clank, clank. Each impact was a nail in my coffin. Each dead thud was the sound of my hope being beaten to death. The glass wouldn't break. It wouldn't yield. I was hitting the wall of my own grave. With one final, desperate sob, I swung the lamp so hard I lost my balance, stumbling forward as it hit the window with another useless clank. It was no use. I was trapped. The walls were a press, and I was caught in the middle. Defeated, exhausted, the lamp slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a heavy thud. There was only one thing left to do. The thing I swore I wouldn't. The only escape I had. I crawled to the door. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to turn the knob. I pulled it open and tumbled out into the hallway, collapsing onto the worn carpet. The door boomed shut behind me. The heavy, final click of the lock. The reset. I lay there, face down, gasping in the stale hallway air. I didn't move. I just let the silence wash over me, a temporary anesthetic for my shredded nerves. 1 minute. 2. Finally, the trembling subsided. I pushed myself up, my whole body aching. I faced the door. My hand reached for the knob. I turned it, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The room was perfect. The blinds were open. The familiar gray afternoon light filled the space. The city skyline was back, cars moving on the street below. The lamp was on the desk, upright and plugged in. The music box was still on the bedside table. Everything was back. A shaky breath of relief escaped my lips. It was over, for now. But something felt wrong. A subtle shift in the space. A feeling. My eyes scanned the room again. Everything was in its place. The ripped photo, the couch, the desk. Then I looked up. My breath hitched. The ceiling. It felt closer. I stood in the center of the room and slowly raised my hand. My fingertips brushed against the cool, white plaster. I didn't have to stretch. The ceiling was lower. My hand was flat against the ceiling. The plaster was cool and smooth. My arm wasn't even fully extended. I could stand on the balls of my feet and press my palm hard against it. A few days ago, I would have needed a stepladder to change a light bulb. Now I could feel the texture of the paint on my fingertips. It was lower. It was definitely lower. Something inside me snapped, not with a bang, but with a quiet, clean break. The part of my mind that was trying to reason, to measure, to understand the rules of this sick game just went silent. What was the point of logic when the very foundation of the world was quicksand? What was the point of playing by the rules when the dealer was insane? A new thought, ugly and sharp, pushed its way to the surface. Control. It wanted control. The neatness, the resets, the way everything returned to its perfect, assigned place. It was all about order. Fine. My eyes landed on the desk. The lamp I had used to beat against the window stood there, pristine. I walked over, my movements stiff. I gripped the smooth metal base. I lifted it. Then I swept my arm across the surface of the desk. Papers, pens, and a half-full coffee mug flew across the room, hitting the opposite wall with a wet smack. Brown liquid dripped down the white paint. It felt good. I turned to the bookshelf. My books. My worlds. I grabbed a handful, not caring about the titles, and ripped them from the shelf. I threw them on the floor. I tore a hardcover in half. The sound of the spine cracking like a bone brought a bitter smile to my face. "You like things neat?" I grunted, my voice raw. I heaved the small armchair over, sending it crashing onto its side. "You want order?" Fucking habit. I worked with a grim purpose, a demolition man in my own cell. I pulled the cushions off the couch and tossed them. I yanked the neatly folded throw blanket and let it fall in a heap. I was a whirlwind of petty destruction. Every overturned object, every scattered paper, was a middle finger to this place. This wasn't panic anymore. This was war. A one-man insurgency against reality itself. I moved to the bed, my sanctuary. I grabbed the comforter and tore it off, sending pillows flying. I was going to turn this whole damn room upside down. I crouched, ready to flip the mattress, when my hand, sweeping under the bed frame to get a grip, brushed against something. It was soft and fuzzy. I stopped. My rampage came to a halt. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I knelt on the floor, the mess I'd created around me forgotten. I reached under the bed again, my fingers closing around the object. I pulled it out. It was a teddy bear. It was old. The brown fur was worn down in patches, matted and dirty. One of its black plastic eyes stared up at me, a blank, lifeless bead. The other was gone, leaving only a few loose threads where it used to be. A small, red ribbon, faded to a dull pink, was tied in a lopsided bow around its neck. This wasn't mine. I'd never owned a teddy bear like this in my life. I hadn't owned any stuffed animals since I was a child. My blood ran cold, a familiar, sickening frost spreading through my veins. The chaos I'd just unleashed felt childish and pointless now. The room wasn't just shrinking. It wasn't just stealing my memories. It was adding things. Things that didn't belong. I dropped the bear on the floor as if it were hot. A new kind of fear began to creep in, worse than the claustrophobia. This was the fear of the unknown other. Whose bear was this? Creak. The sound was tiny, almost imperceptible, but in the sudden silence of the room, it was as loud as a gunshot. It came from the armoire. My head snapped toward it. The right side door, the one I always kept shut, was now open. Just a crack. An inch or two of darkness. I got to my feet slowly. I didn't take my eyes off the armoire. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I crossed the room, my feet crunching on the debris of my own tantrum. I reached the tall wooden doors. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. I pulled the door open, my shirts hung inside. Lined up, white, gray, blue. Each one spaced exactly 2 inches from the next, a habit I could never break. But there was something new. 2 new things. Jammed between 2 of my white button-downs was a dress. A simple, floral print sundress, the kind a woman would wear on a summer afternoon. It looked out of place, a splash of life in my monochrome wardrobe. And next to it, hanging from the same hook as one of my jackets, was a child's coat. A small, blue pea coat with little anchor-shaped buttons. I stared. I just stood there and stared. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The bear could have been a mistake. A fluke. Something left by a previous tenant and missed for years. But this was deliberate. The dress. The coat. They weren't just in the room. They were integrated into my things. Placed inside my most personal space, among my own clothes. As if they belonged there. As if we were all sharing the same closet. A family. A woman and a child. A tiny, high-pitched giggle echoed through the room. It sounded like it was right behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell. My back hit the armoire hard. The room was empty. The couch was overturned. The books were scattered. The coffee stain was dripping down the wall. Nothing had moved. No one was there. My eyes shot to the bed. My breath caught in my throat. The teddy bear. The dirty, one-eyed teddy bear I had left on the floor was now sitting on my pillow. It was propped up perfectly against the headboard, its single black eye staring directly at me from across the room. It was watching me. A scream built in my chest, a pressure that had to get out. I stumbled back, away from the closet, away from the bear. My hands fumbled behind me, trying to find the wall. My mind was just static, a high-pitched whine of pure terror. It wasn't just me. It was never just me. I was a guest here, an intruder in someone else's tomb. The room wasn't my prison. It was theirs. I didn't think. I just ran. I lunged for the door, my only thought to hit the reset, to wipe the slate clean, to make the dress and the coat and the watching bear go away. I twisted the knob, wrenched the door open, and threw myself out into the hallway. I hit the carpet on my hands and knees and scrambled away from the door as it slammed shut behind me. Click! The sound of the lock was the sound of a guillotine blade falling. I stayed there, panting, face pressed against the rough, musty carpet of the hallway. The silence was a mercy. I didn't count the seconds. I just waited until the shaking in my limbs subsided, until the buzzing in my head died down to a low hum. Finally, I pushed myself up. My body was one big ache. There was only one way to go. Back in. I walked to the door, my hand closing around the cool brass knob. I turned it, pushed. I stepped inside. Perfection! The armchair was upright. The cushions were on the couch. The books were back on the shelf, spines aligned. The coffee mug was on the desk, clean. The blinds were open, showing the indifferent lights of the city. The ceiling felt high again. My eyes darted to the armoire. It was closed. I walked over and opened it. Only my clothes hung there. White, gray, blue. 2 inches apart. No floral dress. No little blue coat. I looked at the bed. The comforter was smooth. The pillows were plumped. The teddy bear was gone. A wave of relief so strong it made me dizzy washed over me. It was over. The reset had worked. A clean wipe. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the pressure, the shrinking walls, the lack of sleep. Maybe my mind had just invented a story to explain the madness. My shoulders sagged. I let out a long, shuddering breath. I walked toward the desk, needing to sit down. My gaze fell on the small, silver-backed hand mirror I kept beside the lamp for a quick check before I left, and I froze. There, on the clean, reflective surface of the glass, was a handprint. It was small, the size of a child's hand. The smudges of dirt and grime perfectly outlined 4 tiny fingers and a thumb. It was a perfect, undeniable mark left on my world by something that was no longer there. Or was. The handprint was still there. My breath hitched. My entire body felt like a tuning fork struck against concrete. The small, dirty print sat on the silver gleam of the mirror, a smudge of impossible reality. 4 fingers and a thumb. A child's hand. The dirt was caked in the tiny whorls of the fingerprints. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was real. It was on my mirror. The tantrum, the destruction, the raw-throated yells, they were all a joke. A child's fit. I had tried to fight this place with chaos, and it had responded with something quiet, something intimate, something that had been left behind by a ghost I could now almost picture. The teddy bear. The dress. The little blue coat. A new kind of panic set in. It wasn't the screaming, wall-punching kind. It was cold. It was methodical. It was the frantic, humming energy of a man whose last line of defense has been breached. Control. I had lost control. I had to get it back. If it could add things, it could be unadded. If it could make a mess, it could be cleaned. That was the rule, wasn't it? The reset. But this handprint? It had survived the reset. It was a leftover. A stain. And stains had to be cleaned. My mind latched onto the thought with the desperation of a drowning man grabbing a piece of driftwood. Clean. The word echoed in my skull. If I could make the room pure again, truly pure, maybe I could erase the stain of them. Maybe I could scrub away the memory of the giggle, the sight of the watching bear. I went to the kitchen closet. I pulled out the bucket, the heavy-duty cleaner, the stiff-bristled scrub brush, the roll of paper towels. The tools felt heavy and important in my hands. They were my weapons. I started with the mirror. I sprayed the cleaner directly onto the handprint. The chemicals dripped down the glass, blurring the small fingers. I wiped it with a paper towel. Hard. Then again with a fresh one. And again. I didn't stop until the silver surface gleamed, reflecting my own wide, haunted eyes. There. Gone. One small victory. But it wasn't enough. The feeling of contamination was everywhere. It was in the air, on the floor where the bear had been, in the wood of the armoire that had held their clothes. I filled the bucket in the bathroom sink. The water sloshed. I poured in the cleaner. The sharp, sterile scent of bleach cut through the air. I carried the bucket back out to the main room, setting it down on the white tile floor. I got on my hands and knees. I started in the corner by the door. I dipped the brush, soaking the bristles. I pressed it to the tile and began to scrub. Back and forth. Back and forth. The repetitive motion was a prayer. The scrape of the bristles on the grout was a mantra. My world shrank to the 1 square foot of tile in front of me. I scrubbed away footprints that weren't there. I scoured away invisible grime. With each stroke, I was trying to reclaim my space, to push back against the unseen presences that had made my sanctuary their playground. My knees ached. My back screamed. I didn't care. I moved from one tile to the next, a meticulous, desperate grid. The floor became wet and slick, the clean scent of the chemicals rising up to meet me. I was a machine of purification. This was my penance. This was my exorcism. I was halfway across the room, my muscles burning, my mind a blank slate of physical effort, when I saw it. Tap. The sound was tiny, almost nothing, just a single, soft note in the quiet room. Right in the center of the pristine white tile I had just scrubbed, a drop appeared. It was dark, almost black in the low light, but with a deep, ruby core. It wasn't water. It wasn't from my bucket. I froze, my hand still gripping the brush. I stared at the single, perfect sphere of liquid. It was about the size of a dime. It held its shape for a second, a dark jewel on the white ceramic. I leaned closer. A strange smell hit my nose, faint, but sharp, like rust, like old pennies. Tap. Another drop fell. It landed just an inch from the first. They merged, forming a slightly larger oblong shape. The metallic smell grew stronger. My heart, which had settled into a dull rhythm, gave a hard, painful kick against my ribs. My eyes slowly, unwillingly, lifted from the floor. Up past the white walls, to the ceiling. There, directly above me. A stain. It was small at first, a faint, brownish discoloration on the white plaster, but even as I watched, it grew. It spread, tendrils of a darker, wetter red creeping outwards like a spider web. It was a living thing, a wound opening in the skin of my apartment. No, I whispered. The sound was swallowed by the room. Tap. Tap. 2 more drops hit the floor in quick succession. Then 3 more. The rhythm picked up. It was like a leaky faucet, a steady, maddening percussion counting down to something awful. Tap, 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 tap. The drops were coming faster now, a steady shower of the dark, reeking liquid. Small splashes dotted the clean, white tiles around me, ruining my work, mocking my effort. I scrambled backwards on my hands and knees, away from the epicenter. The smell was thick now, the coppery tang of old blood filling my lungs. It was blood. God, it was blood. It was leaking from the ceiling, soaking through the plaster from the apartment above. But there was no apartment above me. I was on the top floor. The steady drumming of drops on tile intensified. I watched in horror as the stain on the ceiling grew darker, heavier, sagging downwards. A bulge formed, pregnant with the fluid it could no longer hold. The plaster cracked. Then it gave way. It didn't drip. It didn't leak. It poured. A thick, viscous stream of dark red blood gushed from the ceiling, hitting the floor with a heavy, wet roar. It was like someone had turned on a faucet from hell. It churned and foamed as it hit the tile, the torrent splashing against the leg of the overturned armchair. A wave of it spread across the floor, a dark tide that consumed the white. I screamed, a raw, high-pitched sound that was torn from my throat. I tried to get to my feet, to run, but my hands slipped on the tiles, now slick with the stuff. I was on all fours, staring at the waterfall of blood as it filled the room. It hit a patch I had just cleaned, and I saw my own reflection in the dark, pooling surface. My face, white and twisted in a mask of terror. I pushed myself backwards, trying to crab walk towards the door. The blood was spreading fast. It touched my shoes. It was warm. It soaked into the denim of my jeans, a disgusting, intimate heat. No, 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 I chanted, the words meaningless. The corner where the blood was pouring down was now a deep, churning pool. The level was rising. I could see it. An inch. 2 inches. The room was becoming a basin, a slaughterhouse floor. My scrambling became more frantic. I had to get out. I had to hit the reset. My feet found a moment of purchase, and I lunged upright, stumbling like a drunk. I took 1 step, then another. My shoe came down in the spreading pool. My ankle twisted. My feet went out from under me. I didn't just fall. I fell into it. My back hit the floor with a sickening splash that sent a spray of red up into the air. The impact knocked the wind out of me. For a second, I just lay there, submerged. The blood was warm against my skin, soaking through my shirt instantly. It was in my hair, on my face. A drop of it, thick and syrupy, ran into the corner of my eye, stinging. The smell was overwhelming now, a raw, butcher shop stench that made my stomach heave. I gagged, a thick clot of it getting in my mouth. The iron taste was unbearable. It was the taste of death. Pure animal terror took over. I was no longer a person. I was a creature trying to escape a trap. I rolled over, my hands plunging into the warm, slick liquid. I tried to push myself up, but my palms just slid on the tile beneath. I was drowning in it. I crawled. I slipped. My fingers felt something solid, the leg of the desk. I hauled myself forward, pulling my body out of the deepest part of the pool. I was on my hands and knees, dripping, coughing, spitting. I looked like I had been dipped in paint, red everywhere, on my clothes, my skin. My vision was blurred with it. The door. I had to get to the door. I lurched forward, half crawling, half stumbling. Every surface was treacherous. I fell again, catching myself on the edge of the sofa. My red hand left a perfect bloody print on the clean fabric. The roaring of the bloodfall was the only sound in the world. I reached the door, my body shaking so hard I could barely stand. My hand, slick and dripping, fumbled for the knob. It was slippery. I couldn't get a grip. I wiped my hand on my already soaked jeans and tried again. My fingers closed around the cool brass. I twisted. The latch clicked. I threw the door open and hurled myself into the hallway, collapsing onto the rough carpet, a gasping, shuddering mess. The door slammed shut behind me. Click! The lock engaged. I lay there, face down. For how long, I don't know. The only reality was the feeling of the rough, dry carpet beneath my cheek and the sound of my own ragged breaths. Finally, slowly, I pushed myself up. My body trembled, but the adrenaline was fading, leaving a deep, hollow ache. I looked down at myself. My clothes were dry, clean. My hands were pale and unstained. The reset had worked. It was gone. All of it. The blood, the waterfall, the filth. I got to my feet, leaning against the hallway wall for support. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. There was only one thing to do. Go back in. I walked to the door. My hand closed around the knob. I turned it, pushed, and stepped inside. Perfection. The white tile floor gleamed under the lights, so clean you could eat off it. The armchair was upright. The sofa was immaculate, no bloody handprint marring its surface. I walked over to the desk, running my hand along the smooth, dry wood. I looked up. The ceiling was a vast, unbroken expanse of white. Perfect. Not a crack, not a stain, not a single sign of the horror that had unfolded moments before. A laugh escaped my lips. It was a weak, brittle sound. Relief. It was a wave so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. It was a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by stress and fear. It wasn't real. It couldn't have been. I took a deep breath, trying to fill my lungs, to center myself, and I gagged. My hand flew to my mouth. I coughed, my eyes watering. The air. The air in the room was wrong. It was heavy. It was thick. It smelled of iron. It smelled of blood. The smell. It was still here. It wasn't a waterfall anymore. It wasn't the gushing wound from the ceiling. It was just in the air, a phantom scent, the coppery tang of old metal you get when you hold a penny in your fist for too long. The smell of rust. The smell of blood. It coated the back of my throat. It clung to the clean, perfect room like a ghost. My lungs burned. I tried to take a deep breath of clean air, but there was none. I was breathing it in. Again and again. My frantic cleaning, the chemical burn of bleach, it had all been useless. A joke. The room had let me scrub it clean, then simply tainted the air itself. It was inside me now. Silence. The roar of the bloodfall was gone, replaced by a quiet so deep it felt loud, a humming pressure in my ears. The room was watching me, waiting. No more. I couldn't run. I couldn't clean. I couldn't fight what I couldn't see. The rules had changed. It wasn't just moving things anymore. It was mocking me. It was wearing the face of a child. It was bleeding from a ceiling that didn't exist. This wasn't a game. It was a conversation. And I had been silent for too long. A cold, sharp thought cut through the fog of fear. Talk back. If it wants to communicate, then communicate. My eyes landed on the small hand mirror I had left on the desk. Its silver surface was perfect, unblemished. A liar. It had shown me the handprint that survived the reset. It was a part of this. A screen. A stage. I stalked over to the desk. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were rigid. I opened the top drawer. My fingers rummaged past old receipts, paper clips, stray batteries. There. A black, permanent marker. The cap clicked off with a sharp, final sound. It felt like a weapon in my hand. A real one this time. Not a scrub brush. Not a bucket of soap. I picked up the mirror. It was cool to the touch. I held it up, my own face staring back. Pale. Eyes too wide. I put the tip of the marker to the glass. The felt squeaked against the surface as I wrote. Big, blocky letters. I pressed down hard, leaving thick black lines of ink. 4 words. 1 question. W-H-O-R-U. I set the mirror down on the desk, propping it against a stack of books. The question stared out into the room. An accusation. A demand. I had thrown a rock into the quiet pond. Now I just had to wait for the ripples. I turned my back on it. I couldn't just stand there and watch. That felt wrong. It felt like watching a pot of water, waiting for it to boil. It wouldn't perform for me. I had to show it I wasn't scared. A lie, but a necessary one. I walked to the other side of the room. My footsteps were loud on the tile. 1 circuit. I would walk 1 slow, deliberate circuit of my prison. It was a dare. I reached the far wall. I turned. I walked along the wall with the window, not looking out. The view didn't matter. Only the room mattered. I reached the 3rd corner. I turned again, walking past the armoire. My heart began to beat faster. The rhythm picked up with each step. A low drum beat. Thump, thump, thump. I was almost back to the desk. I stopped. I took 1 final, slow breath. The smell of iron was still there. I turned around. My eyes snapped to the mirror. The black ink was gone. My words, my question, vanished, wiped clean. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but my own reflection. Then my eyes focused on the marks that had replaced my own. They were not black. They were a dark, brownish red, the color of a scab. The letters were thin, shaky, as if written with a fingertip dipped in old paint. The message was shorter than mine. A simple, 2-word answer. You know. The air left my lungs in a rush. I knew. What did I know? The bear? The dress? The handprint? It wasn't a random ghost. It was something personal. Something tied to me. The thought was a spike of ice in my gut. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a judgment. And then, the moment my brain processed the last letter, it happened. Click. The sound came from the light switch by the door. Not the soft click of a person's finger, but a hard, mechanical snap. All at once, the lights went out. The entire room plunged into absolute darkness. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat was locked. My body was a statue. I was blind. The only light was the faint gray glow coming through the window from the city outside, not enough to see by, just enough to turn the darkness from pitch black to a deep, menacing gray. My eyes, wide and useless, were still fixed on the spot where the mirror was. I could still see it. A faint, reflective square in the gloom. And in it, a shape. My shape. A dark silhouette against the murk. I could see the outline of my own head and shoulders, a ghost in the glass. I stood there, frozen, trying to will my heart to beat again. Then I saw it. It wasn't just me. It was subtle at first, a flicker at the edge of the reflection. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, a trick of the low light. But I kept staring. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare breathe. There was another shape, standing right behind my shoulder. No, two shapes. One was taller, a slender silhouette that reached my shoulder. The other was small, barely visible behind the first. A child. They were just outlines, voids in the darkness. No features, no details. Just a woman and a child standing directly behind me in the reflection. In my empty, blacked-out room, my heart exploded. It was a physical jolt, like a surge of electricity. Pure animal instinct took over. I spun around, a strangled cry tearing from my throat. My hand fumbled for my phone in my pocket. My fingers were clumsy, shaking. I ripped it out, my thumbs swiping frantically at the screen. Find the flashlight icon. Find it. Click. A brilliant white beam cut through the darkness. It was blinding. I swept the light across the room in a frantic arc. The armchair, the desk, the sofa, the armoire. Empty. Nothing. The room was completely, utterly empty. Just my furniture, sitting there in the harsh glare of the phone's LED. There was no one there. No woman. No child. A laugh, thin and hysterical, bubbled up in my chest. I choked it down. I was losing it. The stress, the blood, the smell. It was making me see things. A hallucination. That had to be it. My back was pressed against the desk, my entire body trembling. I took a shaky breath. Then another. Empty room. I was alone. I was alone. Slowly, so slowly, my muscles fighting me every inch of the way, I turned back to face the mirror. I kept the phone's light pointed away, not wanting the glare to ruin the reflection. I needed to see it. I needed to prove to myself that it was empty, that I was just cracking up. I looked into the dim gray surface of the mirror. My silhouette was there, just as before, and they were still there. The woman and the child, standing right behind my reflection. They hadn't moved. They hadn't vanished when I turned around. They were not a reflection of anything in the room. They were in the mirror. My mind refused to accept it. It was like looking at an impossible shape, a paradox that broke the laws of physics. They were there, and they were not there. My blood ran cold. Then they moved. It was a slow, deliberate motion. The smaller figure, the child, raised a hand. Then the taller figure, the woman, did the same. Two small, dark hands lifting in the gloom of the reflection. They were waving. A slow, gentle wave. A greeting from inside the glass. A scream finally broke free. A raw, ragged sound of pure terror. I wasn't thinking. I didn't choose to move. My body simply launched itself towards the door. I threw myself at it, my shoulder hitting the wood hard. I fumbled with the knob, my hands slick with sweat. It turned. The latch clicked. I threw the door open and scrambled out into the hallway, collapsing against the opposite wall, sliding down to the carpet. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. Click! The lock. I sat there on the floor, curled into a ball, my head in my hands, gasping for air that didn't smell like iron. I rocked back and forth, the rough texture of the hallway carpet, the only real thing in the world. Minutes passed. The terror slowly receded, leaving behind a hollow, vibrating exhaustion. It was over. The reset. I was safe. Eventually, I got to my feet. My legs were weak, but they held me. I had to go back in. I had to see. I walked to the door. My hand closed around the knob. I turned it, pushed, and stepped inside. The lights were on. Bright, clean, sterile. The room was perfect. Pristine. I walked to the desk, my eyes locked on the hand mirror. It was clean. The bloody message was gone. My own reflection looked back at me, pale and haunted, but alone. Completely alone. Relief was a physical wave that almost buckled my knees. It was a mirage. A nightmare. The worst one yet, but it was over. My eyes drifted from the mirror down to the surface of the desk, then to the floor, and I saw it, lying on the clean white tile, right where I'd been standing. My black permanent marker. It was snapped cleanly in two. The plastic halves of the marker lay on the tile like a broken bone. A clean snap. Not crushed, not shattered. Snapped, as if by a pair of invisible, impossibly strong hands. I didn't touch them. I just knelt there on the floor, a few feet away, my back to the door I'd just entered. The room was perfect again. The lights were on, the air was clean. But those two pieces of black plastic were the proof. They were the punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I couldn't read, you know. The words, no longer written in blood red on the mirror, were now branded onto the inside of my skull. They echoed in the silence. I did know. The problem was, I didn't know what I knew. It felt like a memory locked in a box, and the room was holding the key just out of reach, dangling it in front of my face, laughing. My head throbbed. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the heels of my palms into my sockets. Think, what did you see? A woman, a child, waving, from inside the glass, a greeting, or a goodbye. My breath hitched. The memory was trying to bubble up. A flash of something? Rain on a windshield? The squeal of tires? It was slippery, covered in oil and darkness. I reached for it and it dissolved. Gone. My mind was a wall, a thick, concrete wall I had built myself, and something was pounding on the other side, trying to get in. Or maybe it was trying to remind me of what I had locked away. I dropped my hands. My gaze drifted up from the broken marker. Across the room, the large, dark screen of the television was a void, a black hole in the white wall. I'd never once turned it on since I moved in. I didn't even know if it worked. BZZZZT. Crackle! I jolted, every muscle in my body seizing at once. The sound was electric, a whip-crack of static that filled the room. The black screen flashed to life. Not a clean, digital boot-up. It was a violent birth, lines of static rolling down the screen before it resolved into an image. The volume was at maximum. A woman's voice, tinny and distorted, blasted from the speakers. Reporting live from the scene of what can only be described as a tragic accident on Route 9 late last night. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a news report. An old one. The footage was grainy, the colors washed out by the flashing red and blue lights of police cars and ambulances. Rain was pouring down, making the whole scene shimmer and distort. A reporter in a yellow raincoat was holding a microphone, her hair plastered to her forehead. Behind her, a car, or what was left of one. It was a mangled wreck of blue metal, wrapped around a tree. A cold dread trickled down my spine. The image was familiar. Terribly familiar. I knew that tree. I knew that curve in the road. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs unsteady. I took a step closer to the screen, drawn in against my will. The reporter continued, her voice clinical and detached, fighting to be heard over the storm and the sirens. Authorities are still working to piece together the events of the collision, but it appears a second vehicle was involved. 2 fatalities have been confirmed at the scene. The camera zoomed past her, focusing on the wreckage. Paramedics were working with a grim urgency. They pulled a white sheet over something on a gurney. Something small. My breath caught in my throat. A mother and her young son, residents of nearby Northwood, were pronounced dead on arrival. The driver of the other vehicle, sources say, fled the scene before first responders could arrive. A hit and run. The temperature in the room dropped. It wasn't my imagination. It was a physical change. A deep, wet cold that sank into my bones, the kind of cold that comes with the rain. I started to shiver, a violent, uncontrollable shaking that started in my hands and spread through my whole body. A woman. A child. The figures from the mirror. No, it couldn't be. This was a coincidence. A nightmare playing out on a screen. The room was just taking my fears and throwing them back at me. Police are asking for the public's help in identifying the driver, the reporter said, her face earnest and grim. The only evidence recovered from the second vehicle was this single item, found on the shoulder of the road. The screen cut from the reporter to a stock photo from the police department, a close-up of an object in an evidence bag. It was a small, antique hand mirror, silver, with an ornate handle. My mirror, the one sitting on my desk right now. Tour ITOFF exclamation mark. The words tore from my throat, a raw, shredded sound that was barely human. Turn it off! As if obeying my command, the screen went black. The roaring sound cut out. The room was thrown into a sudden, deep silence. For a second, a single blessed second, I thought it was over. Then the screen lit up again. There was no news report, no static. It was a live feed, and it was pointed directly at me. I saw myself on the screen, my own face a mask of horror. Eyes wide, mouth agape, my body still locked in the middle of its silent scream. It wasn't a reflection. The angle was wrong. It was like a camera was mounted somewhere on the ceiling, watching me, watching my terror. Then the image changed. It zoomed in, past my face, past my shoulder. It pushed in on the desk behind me. It zoomed in on the hand mirror, the one from the crash, the one that was supposed to be in an evidence bag miles away, years ago, the one that had answered my question. And as the camera feed held on that silver surface, a single, childish handprint, small and faint like an afterimage, bloomed into view on the glass. Bam! The sound was an explosion. It wasn't the TV. It was the door, the main door of my room. It had been thrown open with such violence that it slammed against the interior wall, shaking the whole frame. I spun around. The hallway wasn't there. Where the familiar, carpeted corridor should have been, there was only blackness. A solid, impenetrable wall of dark. It didn't look like an unlit hallway. It looked like a hole in the world, a patch of nothing. And from the center of that nothing, a voice. It was a whisper. The voice of a little boy, clear as a bell, right next to my ear. Play with me. Primal instinct took over. There was no thought, no decision. I was just an animal trying to escape the jaws of a trap. I launched myself forward, not away from the door, but towards it. My hands found the edge. My feet scrabbled for purchase on the tile. I threw all of my weight, all of my terror, into it. The heavy door swung shut with a deafening boom, cutting off the blackness. I leaned against the wood, my body a trembling wreck, my lungs burning. My fingers fumbled for the lock, twisting the deadbolt home. Click! The lock. My lock. The one I had turned. I squeezed my eyes shut, my forehead pressed against the cool wood of the door. Safe. I was safe. I had closed it. I had won. I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was the television. It was off. The screen was black and silent. My eyes darted to the floor. The two pieces of my broken marker were gone. The tile was clean. Perfect. The reset. It happened while the door was still closed. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood. The lock was home. A solid, satisfying click. I had beaten it. I had closed the door on the abyss. I had shut out the whisper. My eyes opened. The room was clean. My marker was gone. The television was a silent black rectangle. The reset had happened, but this time I was still inside. The door had remained shut. The rules had changed. And then the memory came. Not in a flash. It unspooled behind my eyes like a corrupted film reel, the images jumping and torn. Rain. Not rain. A deluge. Wipers slapping frantically against a waterfall on the windshield. The yellow lines of the road were a smear. The curve came too fast. Headlights. Bright. Blinding. Where they shouldn't be. The screech of tires was my own scream. The impact was a hard, wet thump. Not a crash. Not a bang. A soft, sickening finality. Like dropping a sack of wet laundry. I saw my own hands, white-knuckled on the steering wheel. I saw my own face in the rearview mirror, a mask of stupid panic. And then I saw the other car. A blue sedan, accordioned against a thick oak tree. Steam hissed from its crushed hood. I didn't get out. I didn't call for help. I hit the gas. The memory ended, leaving a toxic sludge in my brain. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. My legs gave out. I slid down the door, my back scraping against the wood, until I was sitting on the pristine tile. A mother and her young son. A hit and run. The pieces clicked into place, the woman waving from the mirror. The boy's voice. This room. This perfect, orderly room. My obsessive need to fix every tiny thing, to straighten every object, to wipe away every smudge. It was all a lie. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to impose order on a memory soaked in chaos and gasoline. My own personal, self-inflicted hell. My mind wasn't the victim here. It was the architect. I lifted my head. My throat was dry. I needed to see the clean white walls. I needed to anchor myself to the order, even if it was a lie. But the walls were not white. My heart seized. It didn't pound. It just stopped. For one long, cold second, it stopped. The walls were paper. Yellowed, brittle newsprint plastered from floor to ceiling. Hundreds of them. Pages and pages overlapping each other, covering every inch of painted surface. The room smelled of old paper and dust. I pushed myself up, my hand shaking as I braced against the door. I took a stumbling step forward. My eyes struggled to focus on the text. The headlines were black and bold. Tragic holiday crash on Route 9. Police seek public's help in fatal hit and run. Northwood mourns loss of mother and son. There were pictures. The mangled blue car. The grim-faced sheriff. A school photo of a little boy with a gap-toothed grin. A photo of a woman laughing, her head thrown back. The woman from the mirror. And then I saw it, on a page torn from the center of the local paper, dated a week after the crash. A grainy photo, a DMV picture taken under harsh fluorescent light. A younger me, thinner, with a different haircut, but unmistakably me. My face was circled. A thick, angry red circle, drawn with a wax crayon. A voice started to speak. It wasn't a whisper. It was coming from all around me, from the walls themselves. It was my own voice, not my inner monologue. It was my actual voice, but flat, detached, clinical, like a pre-recorded message. The coroner's report for the female victim, 34 years of age, indicates cause of death as massive blunt force trauma to the head and torso. Multiple fractures were noted in the ribs, pelvis, and both femurs. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the voice wasn't outside. It was inside. It was everywhere. It was the sound of the room itself. The male victim, 7 years of age, was secured in a child safety seat in the rear of the vehicle. Lacerations to the face and neck were consistent with shattering glass. The fatal injury was determined to be a cervical spine fracture at the C2 vertebra. "No," I choked out, stumbling back. My heel caught on nothing and I fell, landing hard on the tile. "No, stop it." The voice ignored me. It was a machine. Initial evidence suggested the subject in the second vehicle sustained no serious injuries. My eyes, wild with terror, scanned the room, looking for the source. They landed on the desk, the only surface not papered over, and sitting on the desk, gleaming under the light, was the silver hand mirror. I crawled towards it, pulling myself across the floor. I had to stop the voice. I didn't know how, but the mirror was the key. It had shown me the truth. Maybe it could turn it off. I reached the desk, my bleeding fingers smearing on the polished wood as I hauled myself up. I grabbed the mirror. My own reflection wasn't there. Staring back at me from the glass was her. The woman. Her face was pale, her dark hair stuck to her skin as if it were still raining. There was no anger in her eyes, no hatred. There was nothing. A blank, bottomless emptiness that was 1,000 times worse than scorn. She just looked at me, saw me. My own voice continued its relentless report. Investigation of the boy's body revealed small wooden splinters embedded in his palms, consistent with holding a toy car at the time of impact. Her dead eyes held mine in the glass. The details didn't stop. They became more graphic, more precise. Every broken bone, every internal hemorrhage, every wound described in my own calm, steady voice. A sound ripped itself from my throat. It wasn't a word. It was a howl of pure self-loathing. The dam of denial broke, and a tidal wave of guilt and horror crashed over me. I was the monster. This room wasn't the prison. I was. "Shut up!" I screamed. I reared back, my hand clutching the mirror, my knuckles white. My other hand, my free hand, balled into a fist. I wasn't aiming at the reflection. I was aiming at the source of it all, at the thing that started it. I lunged forward. My fist met the glass. The sound was a cannon shot in the small room. A sharp, violent explosion of shattering silver. The mirror erupted. 1,000 glittering shards flew through the air like shrapnel. A web of cracks raced across the surface an instant before it disintegrated. A searing pain shot up my arm. I looked down. My knuckles were a mess of blood and torn flesh. Shards of glass were embedded in my skin. I didn't care. The pain was real. It was grounding. I fell to my knees, cradling my mangled hand. Blood dripped from my fingers, thick and hot, splattering on the white tile. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was deafening in the sudden silence. My own recorded voice had finally stopped. I waited. My chest heaved. I waited for the reset, for the pop of reality snapping back into place, for the clean floor, for the unbroken mirror, for the walls to turn white again. Nothing happened. The door remained closed. The walls remained a collage of my sins. The blood from my hand continued to pool on the floor. It was real. This was permanent. I stared at the floor, at the carnage of silver slivers scattered across the tile. My body sagged. It was over. Whatever game this was, I had broken the main piece. There was nowhere left to go. Then I heard a sound. A soft scrape, like a mouse skittering behind a wall. My eyes shot to the floor. One of the larger shards of glass just moved. It slid an inch to the left, its edge scraping against the tile. Then another piece moved. And another. They weren't reassembling. They weren't flying back to the desk. They were crawling. Like silver insects, they began to shift and stir, pushing against each other with a faint, crystalline chime. They dragged themselves across the tile, leaving thin, bloody streaks from my wounded hand. They were converging on a single point in the center of the room. I watched, frozen, my breath caught in my throat. The shards, hundreds of them, pushed and jostled and locked together. They weren't forming a mirror. They were building something, creating a new shape on the floor. A rectangle. The final piece slid into place with a soft click. There, on the floor, framed by glittering, blood-smeared mirror shards, was a door. It wasn't a reflection of a door. It was a door, small, like for a cellar or a crawl space. It was made of dark, splintered wood, with a tarnished black iron ring for a handle. It did not belong. It was an impossibility laid bare on the floor of my hell. And from beneath it I felt a faint, cold draft. The cold draft was real. It snaked up from the floor, a physical presence in the dusty, paper-walled room. It seeped through the impossible door made of splintered wood, the door born from 1,000 shards of shattered glass. My blood, smeared across the edges of the frame, was already starting to turn a dark, rusty brown. My eyes darted from the small iron ring on the floor to the big, familiar door of the room, the one I'd clawed at, pounded on, screamed at for what felt like a lifetime. And I understood it was a trick, a goddamn trick of cosmic proportions. Trying to leave through that door, the one that led to the hallway, to the world, that was the game. That was the reset. Every time I turned the knob, every time I stepped across that threshold, I was willingly pressing the reset button on my own damn prison. The exit was never the exit. It was the start of the next lap. This thing on the floor, this was new. This was different. My mangled hand throbbed, a dull, fiery drumbeat against the silence. The voice was gone. The newsprint was just paper. My sins plastered on the wall, staring back at me. I was on my knees in the wreckage of my own making. My gaze drifted across the room, across the monuments of my torture. The desk, the small, ornate music box, its lid firmly shut, the little stuffed bear with one button eye, slumped over in a corner, the torn half of a photograph on the nightstand. They weren't just random objects. They were specific, chosen. Then I saw it. It started with the music box, a soft, internal light. Not a reflection. It was a glow, a faint pulse of pearlescent white light seeping through the carved wood. Then the bear. Its one good eye began to shine with the same soft luminescence. Then the scrap of photo on the nightstand, the laughing woman's face now haloed in a soft, ghostly sheen. They were a constellation, a map. They weren't just tools to hurt me. They were pieces, clues. They were something else. My mind, stripped raw and bleeding, couldn't form the word. It didn't matter. They were active. They were awake. A low hum started, not in my ears. I felt it in my teeth, in the tile floor beneath my knees. The hum grew into a deep, guttural rumble. It wasn't an earthquake. It sounded like a semi-truck gearing down on a wet highway. The entire room began to vibrate, the loose shards of glass on the floor chattering like insects. A crack appeared on the wall next to the desk. It was a thin, black line, a spiderweb breaking across a headline about the funeral. It spread, racing up toward the ceiling. But light didn't seep through. Darkness did, a sliver of wet, nighttime black. Another crack snapped across the wall behind me. Then another. The room was coming apart. The newsprint, my wallpaper of guilt, was being torn by an unseen force. The dry, dusty smell of old paper was being replaced by something new. The scent of ozone, of wet asphalt and rain. Through one of the widening cracks, I saw a flash of blue, then red, pulsing, rhythmic. The lights of a police cruiser, painting the impossible darkness in strobing colors. My breath hitched. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The sound of the rain started, a steady patter against a surface that wasn't there. I could hear it. I could hear the frantic slap, slap, slap of windshield wipers fighting a losing battle. The room was no longer a room. It was a box. A cage sitting in the middle of that wet, dark stretch of Route 9. My memory was no longer a movie in my head. It was breaking in from the outside. This was it. The final stage. The prison wasn't just a mental space anymore. It was collapsing into the memory that created it. I was going to be trapped in that moment forever. The crash. The sound. The sight of the blue sedan wrapped around the oak tree. Forever. No, I whispered, the word a dry rasp. I looked at my hands. The bloody, shaking right hand, the clean left hand. I looked at the orderly desk, the perfectly aligned pens, the neatly stacked blank paper. I looked at the bookshelf, every volume arranged by size, perfectly flush. My OCD. My pathetic attempt to control an uncontrollable universe. My desperate need to fix every tiny thing that was out of place. It wasn't a coping mechanism. It was the architecture. Order, precision, control. Those were the bars of my cage. The foundation of this hell. Every time I straightened a book, wiped a smudge, aligned a pen, I was helping it. I was reinforcing the walls. The room gave a violent lurch. A whole section of the wall near the ceiling peeled away, revealing a black sky and the tops of rain-slicked trees. Order was the lock. My eyes snapped to the neat little stack of coasters on the coffee table. Chaos was the key. A sound tore out of me. It wasn't a scream of terror. It was a roar of defiance. I launched myself off the floor. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the demolition crew. I swept my arm across the coffee table. Coasters flew. The remote control hit the wall with a sharp crack of plastic. I grabbed the end table, the nice one I always kept polished, and flipped it. A lamp crashed, the bulb exploding in a pop of light and a shower of fine glass. It felt good. It felt right. I ran to the bookshelf and shoved. It resisted for a second, then tipped, its orderly contents vomiting across the floor in a chaotic avalanche of paper and cardboard. "I'm sorry," I screamed, the words ripping my throat raw. My apology wasn't to the room, it was to them, the woman, the boy. "I am so sorry." I was a hurricane, a whirlwind of grief and rage. I grabbed the perfectly folded throw blanket from the arm of the sofa and tore it in half. I clawed at the newsprint on the walls, ripping down the headlines, my headlines, leaving gaping wounds of white plaster beneath. My bloody knuckles smeared crimson streaks across the pictures of the crash. The room fought back. The shaking intensified. The sounds of the highway grew louder, more present. A horn blared, long and angry, from just outside the cracking plaster. My prison was trying to repair itself, to reassert the order I was destroying. I stumbled through the debris, my eyes scanning for the next target, the next perfect thing to shatter. My gaze landed on the desk, on a single blue ceramic mug sitting by the dormant computer monitor. It was the first thing, the very first change I ever noticed all those cycles ago. The mug that was supposed to be in the cupboard. The genesis. The silent, indifferent beginning of all of this. I lunged for it. My fingers closed around the smooth, cool ceramic. "I'm sorry," I choked out again, my voice breaking. I didn't throw it. I raised it high over my head and brought it down on the corner of the desk with all the force I had left. The sound was not a crash. It was a clean, sharp crack that echoed louder than all the other destruction. Blue fragments sprayed across the wood. A perfect, beautiful thing, now just jagged pieces of trash. It was finished. The rumbling stopped. The sound of the rain faded. The flashing police lights outside the cracks died, plunging the room into dim silence, lit only by the soft, ethereal glow from the objects. And in that sudden quiet, another sound arose, a soft, delicate chiming, a tiny, tinny melody. I turned slowly. My chest heaved. The sound was coming from the desk, from the small, ornate music box. The lid was open. I took a hesitant step forward, my feet crunching on broken books and shattered porcelain. I reached the desk. I looked inside the box. The little ballerina was gone. The velvet lining was empty, except for one thing. Resting in the center, gleaming in the soft light from its own impossible glow, was a key. It was small, made of tarnished silver, the head shaped like an ornate flower. It was old. It looked like it belonged to a dollhouse or a diary. My hand, the uninjured one, reached out. It wasn't shaking anymore. My fingers closed around the cool metal. It felt heavy, real. I turned. My eyes found the door on the floor, the dark wood, the black iron ring, and below the ring, a small, dark keyhole I hadn't seen before. It was a perfect fit. My hand was shaking, the one that wasn't a mess of blood and torn skin, the one holding the small silver key. It felt heavy, too heavy for its size, like it was made of something more than just old metal. My breath came in ragged bursts, each one a small cloud in the suddenly cold air. The glow from the music box, the bear, and the photograph cast long, dancing shadows across the wreckage of my life. I knelt. My knees crunched on shattered ceramic from the mug. A sharp edge pressed into my leg, a small, new pain that barely registered against the throbbing in my right hand. I leaned over the impossible door on the floor. It wasn't a trap door in the typical sense. It was a rectangle of darkness embedded in the wood, as if someone had cut a hole in reality itself. My own blood, smeared and drying on its splintered frame, looked black in the dim light. My gaze locked onto the keyhole. It was a tiny, dark slit beneath the iron ring. It looked ancient, forgotten. I brought the key forward. The tip, shaped like a flower, hovered over the opening. This was it. The escape I'd never known I was looking for. Not the hallway door, the reset button, but this, the real exit. My bloody hand rested on the floor beside me, a useless lump of meat. With my left, I pushed the key in. It slid home with a soft, grating sound, like metal scraping against rust and time. It fit. A perfect, snug fit. For a second, I did nothing. I just knelt there, head bowed, the key in the lock, listening to the sound of my own heart hammering against my ribs. It was the only sound in the world. I took one last, shuddering breath of the room's dusty, paper-scented air and turned the key. There was a loud, solid thunk that echoed in the silence. It was a sound of finality, a mechanism dormant for an age, now awake. The door didn't swing open. It fell inward. It dropped away into nothing, revealing a perfect, sharp-edged rectangle of utter blackness. It wasn't the dark of a basement or an unlit space. It was a void, a deep, silent hole in the world. and then the sound started. It wasn't one sound, it was all of them. At first, a hiss, like tires on wet pavement. Then the frantic, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against a downpour. The sound of rain. Not the gentle patter on a roof, but a hard, angry torrent beating against metal and glass. It filled my head, a memory made real. Images flickered in the blackness below, not clear pictures, but impressions of light and motion. The glint of chrome, the flash of shattering safety glass, 1,000 tiny diamonds exploding in the dark, the dizzying sweep of headlights across wet leaves. A thin, high-pitched wail began to cut through the noise of the storm, the siren. It started distant, a sad cry on the horizon, but it grew louder, closer, splitting the air with its urgent two-tone shriek. It was the sound of a world that had already ended. My own voice joined the chaos, a choked, horrified gasp, a sound I remembered making but hadn't heard in years. It echoed up from the pit, followed by another sound, the one I had spent every moment of my existence trying to forget. The thin, sharp cry of a child. Not a cry of pain, a cry of confusion. A single, questioning sob that cut through me like a shard of that broken glass. A force, cold and invisible, began to pull at me. It wasn't a wind. It was a pressure, a vacuum. It tugged at the fabric of my shirt, at my hair, drawing me toward the edge of the abyss. Panic flared in my chest, hot and sharp. I scrambled backward, away from the hole, my hands scrabbling for purchase on the debris-strewn floor. I looked behind me, hoping for the anchor of my prison, but there was nothing left to hold on to. The room was coming undone. The walls weren't just cracked anymore. They were dissolving. The wallpaper of newsprint, the headlines of my sin, peeled away and crumbled into fine gray ash before they even hit the floor. The plaster beneath turned to powder, drifting away into the gloom. The solid bookshelf that I had toppled was disintegrating, its wood turning to sawdust, the books fading, their pages becoming weightless motes of dust in the eerie glow. My prison, the meticulously ordered cage I had both built and despised, was being erased. The very floorboards beneath me were turning soft, their edges fraying, becoming nothing. There was no going back. The path behind me was gone. There was only the gaping hole in front of me, with its chorus of screaming ghosts. The pull grew stronger. It was a physical, insistent thing now, a giant hand wrapped around my chest, dragging me forward. I was at the very edge of the precipice. I could feel the cold emptiness radiating up from it, smelling of ozone and wet asphalt and something else. Something like blood. No, I whispered, the words stolen from my lips by the pulling void. No, I don't want to see. I didn't want to be there again. I didn't want to live in that moment forever. The prison was hell, but this was the source of hell itself. I would rather face 1,000 more cycles of shifting furniture and whispered threats than be plunged back into the wet, screaming dark of Route 9. I dug my fingernails into the last solid planks of the floor, the wood splintering under the strain. My knuckles were white, my muscles screamed. I flattened my body against what little remained of the room, fighting the pull with every ounce of strength I had left. The sounds from the void grew louder, more present, as if the entire scene was rising up to swallow me. The siren was deafening now. The child's cry was right in my ear. I held on. I gritted my teeth, tears of terror and exertion streaming down my face. I would not let go. I would not go back. And then, from the deepest part of the blackness, something rose to meet me. It was a hand. It was small, pale, and seemed to shine with its own soft, internal light, like the objects in the room. It was translucent, the flickering lights of the memory visible through its faint form. A child's hand. It reached up, calm and steady, through the swirling chaos of sound and shadow. It moved without hesitation, straight toward me. My breath caught in my throat. I stared, mesmerized and horrified. The hand stopped just inches from my face. It was impossibly small, yet it seemed to command the entire space. It turned, palm up, fingers slightly curled. It wasn't threatening, it was waiting. Then it closed around my wrist. There was no heat, no cold, just pressure. An impossible strength that belied its size. The grip was like iron. It wasn't a plea, It wasn't an invitation, it was a judgment. All my resistance evaporated. The strength in my arms vanished. My fingers, which had been clawing at the floorboards, went slack. The hand pulled. It was not a gentle tug. It was a single, decisive jerk. I was lifted from the floor as if I weighed nothing. The last of my reality, the splintering wood, the glowing objects, the very concept of a room, all of it vanished above me as I was pulled down. There was a moment of absolute sensory overload. The roar of the crash, the shriek of the siren, the smell of rain, the sight of flashing lights, it all converged into a single point and then exploded into nothing. Weightlessness. Silence. Darkness. I was falling. Or floating. I couldn't tell. There was no up or down. There was only me and the thick, silent black. I didn't breathe. I didn't think. I just existed in the void between moments. Then I felt something solid beneath my palms. It was rough, gritty, cold, and wet. A smell hit me. Rain. And something sharp, acrid. Gasoline. A sound returned. Not the cacophony from the void, but a low, steady rumble. An engine. And the crackle of a radio, a muffled voice speaking in codes I couldn't understand. My eyes fluttered open. The world was a smear of red and blue light, pulsing rhythmically in the dark. I pushed myself up. My hands were flat against wet, black asphalt. Rain plastered my hair to my forehead. I was on my hands and knees in the middle of a road. My road. I lifted my head. 10 feet in front of me, parked at a skewed angle, was an ambulance. Its back doors were wide open. The lights on its roof swept across the wet trees, painting the scene in strobing flashes of emergency. Red, white, red, white. They washed over the twisted metal of a blue sedan wrapped around a large oak tree. They illuminated the faces of the paramedics who were not looking at the wreck. They were looking right at me. The world solidified around me in flashes of red and blue. My palms were flat on a surface that was both gritty and slick. I could feel the sharp bite of loose gravel digging into my skin. The air tasted of rain and the sick, sweet smell of gasoline. My clothes were soaked through, clinging to me with a deathly chill. A low, official-sounding voice crackled from a radio nearby, lost in the steady hiss of the downpour. I pushed myself up, my arms shaking. The world was a chaotic painting of light and water. I was on my hands and knees in the middle of a dark 2-lane road. Towering, skeletal trees lined the edges, their wet leaves reflecting the emergency lights like a million weeping eyes. In front of me, the ambulance. Its back doors hung open like a gaping mouth, waiting to swallow someone whole. The pulsing lights on its roof cut strobing, hypnotic patterns across the scene. They illuminated the paramedics, 2 figures in dark uniforms, their faces pale and grim. They weren't moving, they were just watching. Watching me. But their gazes slid past me, to something behind me. I turned my head, my neck stiff, a painful crick sending a jolt down my spine. My car. Or what was left of it. A blue sedan, its front end crumpled like a discarded piece of paper, wrapped around the trunk of a massive oak tree. Steam or smoke curled from the mangled hood, dissolving into the rain. The driver's side door was bent open at a hellish angle, and a figure was stumbling out of it. He moved with the slow, dazed gait of a man who had just been violently shaken from one reality into another. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. He put a hand to his head, then looked at the blood on his fingers with a kind of dumb surprise. My breath hitched. I knew that shirt. I knew that haircut. I knew that specific, stupid look of uncomprehending terror. It was me. 10 years younger, 10 years weaker, a lifetime more of a coward. He was real, solid, as real as the rain on my face and the asphalt under my hands. This wasn't a memory playing in my head. I was in it. I was on the set, watching the star of the show. My gaze was pulled away from my past self, drawn toward the other vehicle. It was a station wagon, flipped onto its side about 30 yards down the road. it had fared worse. Much worse. The roof was concave, the windows shattered, the whole frame twisted into a shape it was never meant to hold. And they were there, standing beside the wreckage. They weren't solid like my younger self. They were like after-images burned onto the night. A woman, her form translucent, the strobe of the ambulance lights passing right through her. Beside her, a boy, no older than 7 or 8. He held her hand. They didn't look at the wreck. They didn't look at the paramedics. They looked at me. Not the me kneeling on the road now. They looked at the me who had just climbed from the driver's seat. I expected to see hate in their eyes, a burning rage, a thirst for vengeance that had followed me, that had built the room around me piece by piece. But there was none. There was only sadness. A quiet, bottomless ocean of it. A sorrow so profound it seemed to absorb the light and sound around them. They weren't here for revenge. They weren't my jailers. They were witnesses. They were the jury. The boy, his form flickering like a bad projection, lifted his free hand. He pointed. His small, ethereal finger aimed directly at my younger self. I followed his gaze. Younger me was now standing fully, swaying on his feet. He looked at his hands, then at his wrecked car. Then his head turned, his eyes finding the overturned station wagon down the road. I saw the calculation flicker across his face. The dawning, sickening horror, followed instantly by the primal, selfish urge for self-preservation. His eyes darted to the dark wall of trees beside the road, to the forest, to escape. He took a step. A single, decisive step away from the road, away from the wreck, away from what he had done. He was going to run. He was going to leave them there. Just like I remembered. Just like I'd spent a decade trying to forget. But as his foot touched the muddy shoulder of the road, something began to happen. Around him, in the rain-soaked air, a structure began to shimmer into existence. It was faint at first, a trick of the light, the ghostly outline of a wall, decorated with a familiar pattern. The newsprint, headlines swimming like ghosts in the dark. A rectangle of absolute blackness started to form in the air beside him. The door, the bookshelf with its ordered spines, flickered into view, a phantom architecture built from cowardice and denial. The room, my prison. It wasn't a place I had been sent. It was a place that had been built, and this was the groundbreaking ceremony. It wasn't punishing me for the crash, it was punishing me for running. It was manifesting around him, preparing to seal him away, to feed on his guilt for the next 10 years, resetting every time he tried to leave through the wrong door. The loop was about to begin. A new kind of terror, cold and sharp, pierced through my shock. It wasn't the fear of being in a memory. It was the fear of understanding. I had been pulled through the floor not to relive my punishment, but to witness its birth, to watch the cage lock from the outside. Unless that wasn't the point. The boy wasn't pointing at him in accusation, he was pointing him out to me. The paramedics weren't staring in shock, they were waiting. The ghosts of the woman and child weren't judging, they were observing. The whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. The past didn't have to repeat. I wasn't just a spectator, I was here. The key, the door, the fall. It wasn't an escape into a deeper hell. It was an intervention. My younger self took another step toward the trees, his movements becoming more hurried. The phantom room around him grew more solid, its walls beginning to block out the strobing lights. No, not again. A roar tore from my throat, a sound that was not a word but pure, raw negation. It was the sound of a decade of self-hatred, of regret, of being haunted by a choice made in a single, gutless second. I launched myself forward. My feet slipped on the wet asphalt, but I found my footing, driving myself across the 10 feet that separated me from myself. He heard me. He turned, his eyes wide with a new, fresh panic. He didn't see an older version of himself. He saw a madman, a stranger, erupting from the chaos of the night. I didn't slow down. I crashed into him with the force of a linebacker. The impact was brutal. We went down in a spray of muddy water, his breath driven from his lungs in a sharp gasp. We hit the ground hard, my shoulder taking most of the blow. Pain flared through me, real and electric. I scrambled on top of him, pinning him to the wet ground. His hands came up to push me off, his face a mask of confusion and terror. "Get off me! Who the hell are you?" he choked out, his voice thin and reedy. My voice. "Shut up!" I snarled, my face inches from his. I grabbed the front of his shirt, my knuckles digging into his chest. "You're not going anywhere. What are you talking about? Let me go!" He struggled, trying to writhe out from under me. He was surprisingly strong, panic strength. "No!" I slammed him back against the road. The back of his head hit the asphalt with a sickening thud. "You stay! You hear me? You stay!" My words were a frantic torrent. I wasn't just talking to him. I was screaming at the part of myself that had lived inside me for 10 years, the part that had built the walls and turned the key. "You don't run," I spat, rain and tears mixing on my face. "You don't hide in the woods. You don't pretend this didn't happen. You walk over to them." I jerked my head toward the paramedics, who were now starting to move, jogging toward us. "You tell them what you did. You call the police. You face it. You have to face it." He stopped struggling. He just stared up at me, his young, terrified eyes searching my face. I don't know what he saw. A ghost? A lunatic? Or maybe, just maybe, the terrifying weight of his own future. I held his gaze, my grip on his shirt unrelenting. In that moment, kneeling in the rain, pressing my own past into the mud, something shifted. The immense pressure in the air, the feeling of being in a scene set in stone, it all began to loosen. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The phantom room was gone. The air where it had been forming was just empty, wet night. And the woman and the child were still there, by their broken car. But their expressions had changed. The infinite sadness was still present, but it was softer now, overlaid with something else. A flicker of release, of acceptance. The woman raised her hand, the one not holding her son's. She didn't wave, she didn't beckon, she just gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't forgiveness. I knew I hadn't earned that. It was an acknowledgement. A closing of a book. A judgment rendered, and the sentence, finally, served. As I watched, their forms began to lose cohesion. They grew thinner, more transparent, like smoke caught in a breeze. The flashing red and blue lights shone through them without resistance. The boy's hand dissolved first, then the woman's face, her sad eyes being the last thing to fade into the rain-swept darkness. They were gone. And then everything else started to go too. The sound of the rain bled away into a uniform hiss, then silence. The strobing lights of the ambulance melted into each other. The red and blue bleeding together into a soft purple, then a pale gray. The solid, gritty feeling of the asphalt beneath me turned soft, then non-existent. The face of my younger self, staring up at me, began to blur, his features losing their definition. The pressure of my hands on his chest vanished. The entire world, the whole memory, was dissolving. It was being washed away, not by rain, but by a tide of pure, sterile white. The color bleached the trees, the road, my own hands. Everything flattened, lost its depth, and was swallowed by a blank, silent, and absolute whiteness. The white noise bled away, leaving a ringing in my ears. The world didn't snap back into place. It seeped in, slowly, one broken piece at a time. The first thing I felt was the floor. Wood. Hard and unforgiving, a splinter digging into my cheek. The next thing was a smell. Stale coffee and dust. I cracked open an eye. A bar of sunlight, thick with dancing dust motes, cut across the room from a grimy window. Real sunlight. It felt warm on my face. I pushed myself up, my joints screaming in protest. My body felt like it had been used as a punching bag for a decade. Maybe it had. I was on the floor of my apartment. My real apartment. Not the loop sterile, repeating version. This one was a disaster. Books were scattered, spines broken, pages torn. A cheap wooden chair lay on its side, one leg splintered. A coffee mug was shattered near the wall, a dark brown stain drying on the floorboards. It was the chaos of a man coming apart at the seams. It was the chaos I had left behind before the loop started. It felt right. It felt honest. My eyes scanned the room, a frantic, desperate search. I was looking for the changes, the subtle shifts. The book moved an inch, the new crack in the ceiling. My gaze swept over the cluttered desk, the overflowing trash can, the stack of unpaid bills. Nothing. Everything was just as it should be, a perfect snapshot of my own miserable life. Then my eyes landed on the small, empty space on the bedside table. The hand mirror was gone. The spot where it always sat, where it always reappeared after every reset, was empty. A faint circle in the dust was the only sign it had ever been there. My breath caught in my throat. It was gone, really gone. Silence. Not the charged, waiting silence of the room. This was just quiet. The sound of an empty apartment in the middle of a Tuesday morning. The distant rumble of traffic from the street below. The hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. For a full minute I didn't move. I just listened to the sounds of a world that had forgotten I existed. A world I was terrified to believe I had returned to. Then a sound cut through the quiet. B-Z-Z-Z-T. It was so sudden, so sharp, it made me jump. My head whipped around. The sound came again. B-Z-Z-Z-T. On the floor, half hidden under a crumpled shirt, was my phone. Its screen was lit up, vibrating against the wood. My heart hammered against my ribs. A phone call, a text. It could be part of it. A new twist. A new, crueler version of the game. My hand trembled as I reached for it, my fingers closing around the cool plastic. I lifted it. The screen was bright, almost painful to look at. A text message. From Leah. A name I hadn't let myself think. A name that belonged to the world outside, the world before. My thumb shook as I swiped to open it. The message was just a few words. You okay? Popped into my head for some reason. I read the words once. Twice. A third time. My vision blurred. A sound tore out of my throat. A ragged, ugly-sounding sob that was more pain than relief. It felt like a crack splitting open in my chest. Tears, hot and real, streamed down my face, dripping from my chin onto the phone screen. The simple, casual message was an anchor. A lifeline thrown into the abyss I had been floating in. It was proof. Proof that a world still existed where someone thought of me. A world where I wasn't the only person alive. My fingers, clumsy and shaking, tried to type a reply. I'm okay. I'm back. God, I'm sorry. The words wouldn't come. I couldn't form them. I just sat on the floor, clutching the phone like a holy relic, and cried until my throat was raw and my eyes burned. I cried for the man I had been, for the coward at the side of that dark road, and for the ghost I had become in that room. After a long time, the tears stopped. A hollowed-out exhaustion settled deep in my bones. I used the leg of the desk to pull myself to my feet. Every muscle ached. I looked around the apartment again. The sunlight streamed in. The mess was just a mess. The suffocating presence, the feeling of being watched, of being judged by the very walls around me, it was gone. This wasn't a prison. It was just a crappy one-bedroom apartment belonging to a man who had a lot of work to do. And there was only one way to know for sure. My eyes fixed on the front door. The cheap, white-painted door at the end of the short hallway. The door I'd opened hundreds, maybe thousands of times, each turn of the knob a gunshot that signaled the start of my own execution. The start of the loop. I took a step toward it. My legs felt like lead. The floorboards creaked under my weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet apartment. Each step was a battle. My body remembered the routine. My muscles were tensed, ready for the fall, for the disorienting lurch as reality reset itself. Every instinct I had honed over countless cycles was screaming at me. Don't touch it. Don't open it. It's a trick. It's always a trick. I reached the door. I could smell the stale paint and the faint, dusty scent of the hallway on the other side. A smell I hadn't smelled in what felt like a lifetime. My hand rose, slowly, hovering in the air just inches from the brass doorknob. It looked so ordinary, cold, solid. It wasn't the instrument of my damnation anymore. It was just a doorknob. But the fear was still there, a cold, black snake coiling in my gut. What if this was the most sophisticated loop yet? A hyper-realistic simulation designed to give me the ultimate hope, only to rip it away at the last possible second? What if I turned this knob and found myself back in the car, the rain pouring down, the ghosts of a woman and her child watching me from the wreckage? My hand was shaking so hard I had to steady it with my other. I rested my palm on the knob. The metal was cool against my skin. It felt real. Solid. I squeezed my eyes shut. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. A frantic, desperate rhythm. You don't run. You face it. My own voice, snarling at my younger self on that wet asphalt. The words echoed in my mind. This was it. The last wall. The last test. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I held it. And I turned the knob. The sound of the latch clicking back was like a thunderclap. It was a final, mechanical sound. A sound of release. I pulled the door inward. It swung open on silent hinges. No creak, no groaning protest. Light from the hallway flooded in. It wasn't the sterile white void. It wasn't the swirling chaos of a memory. It was the dim, yellow, fluorescent light of my apartment building's corridor. I could see the scuff marks on the opposite wall. I could see the faded, cheap carpet that needed cleaning. A door down the hall opened. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a woman with a small, yapping dog I hated, stepped out. She saw me standing in my doorway, a wild-eyed wreck. She gave a polite, slightly nervous smile. "Morning, Ethan," she said, her voice perfectly normal, perfectly real. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. A morning. A new day. A real day. My breath escaped me in a long, shaky sigh. "Morning," I managed to rasp, my voice sounding like a stranger's. I took a step. My foot left the worn floorboards of my apartment and landed on the thin carpet of the hallway. I was out. I was over the threshold. The air didn't shimmer. The world didn't collapse. Nothing reset. I took another step, moving fully into the hall, turning my back on the room. I was free. The relief was so immense, so total, it almost buckled my knees. A giddy, hysterical laugh bubbled up in my chest. I was free. I could walk down this hall, go down the stairs, and walk out into the sun I could call Leah. I could start again. But a morbid, final curiosity made me stop. I had to see it one last time, not as a prisoner, but as a free man. I turned around, slowly, to look back into the apartment that had been my world. My hell, my purgatory. It was just a messy room, bathed in the morning light. But for a single, frozen moment, my eyes saw something else. On the blank plaster of the wall just inside the doorway, the wall that had been empty a moment ago, something shimmered in the air. A trick of the light, a phantom afterimage burned onto my vision. An oval of dark, ornate silver, framing a pane of glass so clouded and ancient it looked like a dead eye. The hand mirror. It hung there for less than a heartbeat, an impossible reflection in a world that was supposed to be real. It didn't reflect me. It didn't reflect the hallway. It reflected nothing. It was a hole in the world, a scar left behind. I blinked, and it was gone. The wall was just a wall again, empty, white. But I had seen it. I knew I had. I was out of the cage, but a piece of the cage was now inside me. I could leave the room, but the room would never truly leave me. The door was open. The sentence was served. But the scar would remain forever.